We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught.
Give me a break.
Are the perfect person to teach them because you've been teaching your child since day one.
Break the mold. It's really beautiful outside the box.
Welcome to Kevin Unscripted.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Studio. Yes, I've been looking forward to this for a bit. We're going to be talking about homeschooling.
Yes.
One of the first things I want to do, though, before we get into that is I don't have a sponsor for this episode, but I did have a couple of friends come over, and we were talking about it earlier with helping me set up with some of the camera angles and lighting and whatnot. So the two of them, Skylar Roswell and Giannis Palm.
Okay.
They're both. Have you ever heard of System Rentals in Fort St. John?
Systems by Trail, or
no? Yeah. So they
that's
bought
an old
out.
One.
Yeah. So
yeah.
System Rentals.
Oh, okay.
They bought out Systems by Trail.
Okay.
And
yes.
so same kind of company, equipment and everything else, but Skylar Roswell bought them out.
Okay.
And then him and Giannis came over and helped me out. Man, those guys, you want to learn anything about audio and video and lighting and just get your brain packed full of information, give them a shout.
That's neat.
So we kind of met a little while ago because we got into goats.
We did.
And that's how we met, was through, we ended up getting, what do you call them? It's not a billy goat, a little...
No, Nigerian.
And
Doling. It's a doling when it's a little girl.
Oh, doling. Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know that. I was just calling them baby goat. Because the mother's
like a big one, a female, is a doe, right?
Yeah.
And the little one is a doeling, or if it was a male, it would be a buckling.
Oh, okay.
Every animal has multiple names depending on its gender and its age.
And so what do you call a male?
It would be a buck if it was unfixed, or a wether if it was fixed.
The wether.
Yes.
And they're pretty smelly, aren't they?
Depends if you're a goat person or a sheep person.
But the wethers, are they still as smelly as the bucks?
They tend to not be as smelly.
Huh.
They'll still be smelling like goats, but they'll kind of retain more of their young smell rather than get that older goat smell. Yeah.
Well, it was pretty cool to go check them out, and I think that's what kind of brought up this whole topic and subject about homeschooling. Thing about homeschooling is that it's really picked up in the last, I don't know, I'd say about 3 or 4 years. I've noticed it anyways, where a lot of people are starting to get into homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And then also I think the perception has softened quite a bit too. So
Yes.
there's a lot to cover with, I guess, how do people get involved? What are the reasonings and what are all the avenues and options? And I guess that's what I hope to get into. But to start out with, why don't we talk about, what got you interested in involved into homeschooling?
Well, I was homeschooled myself as a child. And I would say that part of that was good. And it was a great learning experience for me. I was able to work at my own pace. And I can remember in grade 3, I just took off. And all of a sudden I was in grade 5. And it was a wonderful feeling to not be bored and to just be able to take off with something and learn it as fast as I wanted. Right? So some of my homeschooling years were like that. And then some of my homeschooling years were more like unschooling, which you'll hear about. And I'm not as keen on that type of homeschooling. It's a part of home education where parents choose to just let their children learn at will, and they don't create a structure for the child to learn. And so it's fine if that's what you want to choose for your family. But from my own personal experience, the years that we did unschooling, they kind of became lost years for me, and I actually had to make up for that later. Like when I did want my grade 12 diploma, I had to go back and cover some of that stuff that would have been done those years. And so, and it's difficult. Like when you're a parent, you only have so many choices sometimes, and you just try to make the best one for your family. And I'm 100% certain that my parents did that all the way along. They really were very dedicated parents, right? And they couldn't see the future for sure, but they definitely gave me a lot of gifts that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so I think a big thing to consider is that back in my generation, yes, a lot of homeschoolers were weird and unsocialized. I even follow a blog that says "Weird Unsocialized Homeschoolers" is the name of her blog.
I guess the stereotype, isn't it, when it comes to the homeschooling?
Absolutely, yeah.
So the unschooling part, though, is that based off of trying to give people real life experience and knowledge?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I could see how.
It's almost more of like an apprentice style life, right?
Yeah.
But the problem, it's not that the problem that comes in is that eventually you become an adult and you have to make yourself work in today's society somehow. You have to be able to enter the society and function. And if you've never learned how to take a test, for example, and I'm not a heavy testing person, I don't think that's great stress for kids. But if they've never taken any test ever and now they need to take an entry test for trade school, that could totally just sweep them off their feet.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think that parents need to look at homeschooling in a balanced way as best they can. Yes, bring your values into it. That's a huge part of what homeschooling is now you're bringing your values into the lives of your children, and you're creating a structure where you're incorporating your values and you use the wisdom of others. And don't be afraid to reach out for that wisdom, right? There are so many people who have homeschooled. They're in second or third generation. One of my friends is a grandma. And she homeschooled her own children, and now she's homeschooling her grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And she has people in her community who ask her to please homeschool their children because they see the wisdom she has. And she's like, no, I know what I'm meant to do, right? But I'll definitely share with you.
Well, that's, I think, one of the concerns people have is the ability to not only spend that time, but then make sure that a lot of that curriculum is covered. It's presented in a way where it does kind of set the child up in a way where it's recognized, so that if they have different choices and curiosities or interests later on in life, they have the ability to navigate through that. So, you know, whether it be continuing on with college or maybe, you know, they go from one trade to another. So from a parental, I guess, point of view, how would that approach be to go from making sure that through all the different grades as you're progressing from kindergarten all the way up to graduation, you're able to give the information, because
Yes.
there's quite a bit there that we lose ourselves, never mind. Like even teachers specialize in certain grades, like they go, grade 6 or 7, or maybe later on into high school.
Right.
So how do you do that?
Yeah. So there's it's like a smorgasbord for homeschooling. You can do the unschooling side of it. You can go all the way to the other side where you're enrolled with a school. They give you a point form at the beginning of the school year. You lay out curriculum with a curriculum advisor, and you literally meet all these points that match up with the BC education requirements. And you can have 100% accountability where every point you're reporting it to this teacher, and then they report to the government, create your report cards, and you're like basically bringing school home and doing usually to a much higher level in a sense, because you're tutoring a single child or a couple of children.
Yeah.
And so there are families that go there and they'll actually overlap 2 or 3 curriculums, and they'll cover everything that the BC education requires, plus all the things they think are important. And like I say, each to their own. I think what's important is to boil down your family values and your family goals, and then work towards that with your kids. Right?
So principles, making sure they're principled people. They have, all the different work ethic and I guess character traits that they're able to develop for themselves.
Because education is not just academics.
No.
Sometimes we get so wrapped up in, well, education is knowing my English and my math and my algebra and my grammar. I'm like, well, sure. And if you come out of high school with A+ and all of that, but you can't sit down and have a good conversation with a person without being in a conflict, it's not going to help you much, is it? If you don't have good work ethic and you go get your first job and you can't stick with it and you can't get off your phone on your break and things like this, well, you're not going to keep your job, right? So absolutely, you need to think of the whole person. Like, yes, knowledge is important, but so is character, so is self-discipline, so is understanding more people in the world and learning how to function with them, even if they have different values than you, right? And I really praise homeschooling in a sense for giving kids, the kids have this chance to associate and socialize with people of many ages, many backgrounds. You're not just in a classroom with kids 1 to 2 years from your own age and your 1 or 2 teachers. When you become a homeschool family, you do stuff with other homeschool families. We don't sit at home alone.
Yeah.
Most of us have such heavy social schedules. We're like, I'm sorry, I really have to cross something off.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
and it's like, I'm not answering my phone this week because the schedule's full. You know?
For you to do anything, you have to take something out of that routine to be able to, so it's always a constant prioritizing on
right?
how to go about it.
And so, I mean, you get kids who are in groups with other kids of all ages, so they're learning how to associate with younger people. They're learning how to take care of little children. They're learning how to deal with the mean guy in the room. They're learning how to show respect to an elder who's like a grandma or something, or hold the door for her so she doesn't get knocked over, and I love how my children can pretty much walk into any casual social setting and talk to anybody in the room. They don't care if you're 50 years older or if you're 7 years younger.
Just well-rounded.
Yes.
Well-rounded people.
Yes.
Well, what's your approach on that then? How do you go about doing that?
Lead by example. Mostly. Like, I have to watch that I don't carry prejudices. I can have opinions about, how this family or that family chooses this or that group of people. But it's really important to say, well, this is how I feel about it, and this is why I choose this path, but I'm going to respect them as a person. And I'm open also to discuss things with them and just to really model a mutual respect attitude. And the kids pick up on that. Kids learn so much more from what we do than what we say.
Oh, absolutely. That's, I think, one of the beginning abilities to learn is through perception. I mean, as a baby, the first thing is through visual cues. And
Yes.
a lot of people What is that saying again? There was a leadership course that I took. And the reason why I like doing a lot of the podcasts in person is because 50, now I'm going to get these percentages mixed up a little bit, but about 50 something percent, 56 or 60% is through visual cues. So body language, gestures, that's why people talk with their hands so much, right? And some people are just real elaborate. The other part is about 20 or 15% is through tone. So how you structure, when you're talking, is it going to be, tone basically. And then the final part is obviously through the words themselves. So you fill out so much more of a conversation through body language and tone.
Yes.
And so that makes a lot more sense when you're texting someone.
Yes.
How you can take that into all these different variations, because you don't have that ability. You could probably put a little bit of tone in that. I mean, books have a very good way of being able to express thought and mental
the gift
image.
of an author, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, there's so much more to video.
Yes.
Right? We all love movies.
We do.
I mean, if you're going to read a book or a movie, people gravitate to the visual aspect.
Yeah. And the audio, that's in there too.
Yeah, that's true. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You hear a lot more than you think you're hearing, right? Your brain's taking a lot in.
Yeah.
I learned that with one of my kids. One of the things that has, I think, moved some people into homeschooling is there's a huge struggle with, what is called, I'll say it called, because I don't always agree with it as a diagnosis, but ADHD. And you have these children, a lot of them boys, who really struggle in a school setting. And they can't sit still, and they can't focus, and they're getting in trouble, and then they're having anger management problems. And I'll honestly say that one of my kids for sure, probably two of them, because the other one is still quite young, but one for sure would have been, he would have been assessed as ADHD had he been in school. And I started out school with a very kind of a academic approach, because I'm an academic person. And my first son, it worked great. It went swimmingly. We picked out the books for each grade. We went through them. He loved it. He did his work. At the end of the day, you high five each other. You have a few things where you struggle, but you get it. And then I thought, hey, I'm good at this.
Yeah.
And my second son entered grade 1, and it was like locking horns every day. And
even though you had more experience, it was a completely different application.
It was completely different. And I learned right away I couldn't give him the same books that his brother had done the year before.
Yeah.
They were only a year apart, but they're very different individuals. And there became this comparison. Well, I did that last year and I got it. And I was like, whoa, now this child is starting to feel like he's dumb. And he's actually speaking this over himself, right? And what you speak over a child is so impactful. And what you let them speak over themselves.
What exactly? Explain that a little bit.
Sure.
Speaking over.
Sure. I'll just keep using the example of my son. So I'm like, you're so smart with my first, right? You got that so quick. Wow, that's amazing. You're speaking over them. You're enforcing an understanding of themselves, right? And then my second son's like, I'm so dumb. I can never figure out how to do this. Or my daughter last year, she was getting long division for the first time in her grade. And she would come to me crying. She's like, I can't do math. And I'm like, that's not true. It's not true that you can't do math. You can. It's just a pattern that's going to take a little bit longer for you to learn, because you're a different type of smart. You're not dumb. You're just a different type of smart. And so instead of letting her label herself as dumb in math, I take that away and I say, no, your brain is like a tree. And this is another favorite analogy of mine. Your brain is like a tree, and you can't have fruit out on a branch that hasn't grown yet. And we're still growing that branch. And so don't beat yourself up because you don't have pears on your tree. Like, you didn't grow the pear branch yet, you know, or the apple branch, or whatever one it is, right? And every child, every person, but for sure in children you see it the most clear, because they're very raw and undeveloped, has natural types of smart or natural gifts that they're born with. And those areas, they will grow faster unless you limit them. And one of the difficulties with children who have, back to the ADHD, I'm going in circles here, but I am connecting all of this.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah, is that they have gifts and they have types of smartness that they can't grow in the schoolroom. For example, my son that I was really wrestling with, one day he started talking about something he was seeing outside, and he was telling me details as we were driving down the road, and he was seeing things along the road that I never noticed, and I'd driven that way hundreds of times, right? And he's
Very
like, Mom,
observant.
yes, and his attention to detail was phenomenal, and he started showing me things that I never saw. And just yesterday, actually, it had rained overnight, and he's like, Mom, I really need you to come and see something. And I'm like, oh, I'm really busy. I'm harvesting the garden. He's like, it'll only take 5 minutes, Mom. You have to come and see something. And I'm like, yeah, I know who you are, and I know you've seen something that I wouldn't see without you showing me. So let's go see it. And he took me into the woods, and he walked me down this fallen tree, and he showed me like 3 different kinds of fungus growing on it, and this special kind that only shows up at certain climatal, I don't even know how to describe it. Different seasons and environmental conditions, right? Yeah. And then he brought me down another fallen log, and I'm like, where are we going? He's like, just wait, you'll see. And all of a sudden we stop, and we're in this little spot, standing on a fallen tree, like 8 feet off the ground. And we're surrounded with wild berries, and the sun's shining down on us in the middle of the trees. Oh. And he's like, Mom, feel it? And I was like, wow, yeah. What he wanted me to see wasn't just something to see. It was a place to be, right? And he has this gift. And how can you help a child develop that gift in a classroom where it's busy and you have to do a certain curriculum in a certain plan, in a certain order? And that's what I was trying to do with him when he was in grade 1 and grade 2 and grade 3. And all of a sudden one day I realized I was destroying my relationship with my own child. And I was literally trying to take this little star-shaped peg and pound it into a square hole. And I literally locked myself away and cried when I saw what I had done. I was like, I'm doing this all wrong. And I had done it all right with the first kid because I understood him. And what I needed to do was understand my child so that I could educate him in a way where he was going to be his best self and bring things to the world that only he can bring to the world, right? So
there's a lot there, but you're pretty much hitting on, like you were talking about ADHD. There's what do they call that when you read things backwards?
Oh yeah, dyslexia.
Dyslexic. Mm-hmm. I remember when I was in school, those are two things that started to become a little bit more of they were at the forefront. Yes. People started to become aware of it. And then of course, because they were aware of it, some people, or it just seemed like it was an explosion of people that were dyslexic or ADHD was a big one. Yes. And I don't know if it was because more people were actually being diagnosed as ADHD or dyslexic, or people just becoming more aware of it and knew how to be able to deal with it. But it does speak to what you were just talking about, because everybody has different learning curves.
Absolutely.
And ability, like I think a very common one is where people say they just learn better with their hands. They're hands-on people, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So to teach everybody in a classroom setting that have 30, sometimes a whole lot more within a classroom.
Yes.
And then make them all fit a certain way of being able to learn. Yeah. And if you don't fit that mold, then it's not the system's issue. It's, we've got your special needs, or that you give them a lingo, you give them a label. A label.
Yes. And you speak something over them, and it becomes a handicap to them, rather than this is my gift, this is my handicap.
And then they go to college, and you learn a completely wildly different way of learning altogether again, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So is that one of the key reasons why there's such a high level of value with homeschooling, is your ability to make sure that it's a case by case, like an individual, child by child way of learning, instead of just a cookie cut. This is the way we're going to learn, like you would in a typical public school setting.
Yes, I would say that that's a huge part of it, is that you see you have a child who is struggling, and the teachers are saying, I'm sorry, I can't get your child to do what needs to be done here, and then you're in trouble with the principal, and then you're off to see doctors, and then you're being told you should medicate your kid, right? And that's scary stuff as a parent. And I'm not saying, you're a bad parent if you had to medicate your child. You know what? You're doing your best. Every parent is literally doing their best, right? We can't have a child and not love them and do our best for them. But I'm really glad to be doing this, because I think there's a lot of knowledge that isn't out there. And one of them is that your child's not necessarily handicapped or wearing a label. They just have different gifts. Yep. And where they are, it's like they're planted in the wrong soil or the wrong climate. And so they're not going to thrive, and they're not going to produce the leaves and branches and fruit that you're looking for, because they need to be in a warmer climate or a cooler climate or a wetter one or a drier one, right? And
isn't it weird how sometimes we get lost, with trying to put such a high level of importance on everybody's diversity and uniqueness and like all these different variations of people, but then the approach for every problem is the same.
I know. Yes.
Like it doesn't seem to make sense, does it? I mean,
right? Like on the one hand, we're preaching it, but we're not living it.
Well, exactly. Yeah. It doesn't always seem to be that obvious until it's pointed out.
Yes. Yeah.
But with homeschooling, it probably gives you the ability to think outside the box a little bit, doesn't it? It gives you the skills to be able to see things and approach problems and hurdles a lot differently. And I think in some cases it would probably be the result of maybe a reason why you can't do something, to understanding that those are just, I think that's life, and your ability to navigate through it is going to be those skills that lead you to success, really, at the end of the day. Yeah.
And a lot of parents who have talked to me about homeschooling, they'll say, I could never do what you're doing. And I want to pause right there. Yes, you actually can. If it's something you want to do, you can, because there's so much support. There's so much of a network out there. When I was a child, my parents had probably 5 other families that they could network with. And we did get together with those families, but it was very small. It's exploded now. There are multiple ways to register or enroll your child. You can go through a public education. You can go through a private education. You can go through a Christian or a Catholic education. There's so many ways that you can tie in and get support. You can get resources. You can get funding. You can have people network with you, and often homeschool families will network together, and they'll be like, okay, today I teach the kids, this mom teaches the kids these subjects, and this mom's going to do these subjects. And it's really, you can make it whatever you want.
So what do you tell them after that on maybe resources? Where do you go for something like that? Because I know that's probably one of the highest reasons why a lot of people don't engage. Yes. They just don't. Where do you start, and how do you go about doing that?
First thing I would say is come to like one of our fall events where a whole bunch of homeschool families get together. We bring all the resources we don't want anymore, and you can start talking to moms and teachers and support teachers, and you start finding out how much there is out there, right? And we usually have these events, in this area, we usually have them twice a year, once in the fall and once in the spring, where we'll gather together, we'll bring all the resources we don't need anymore, people will pick through, take stuff home, we'll share, hey, I like this supplier for these books, and I like this supplier for these books. If you can't come in person, there's homeschool groups like on Facebook or probably through other social apps as well. And we've lots of times had people come on and say, somebody will approach me and say, hey, I want to know more. How do I find out more? I'm like, well, I'll add you to our homeschool group, and you just ask a question, you start a discussion, and before you know it, you have
So do you have like a committee or something? Is that a structured thing, or is it just kind of a common?
Yeah, you can. In Fort St. John, they actually do have like an organization and a committee. And they run events, and you pay a very small fee. I think it's $10 or $20 a family per year. And then everything that happens, they have time at the skating rink, they have time at the indoor soccer field, and several other things. They have museum trips. Basically, they're a school.
Yeah.
Right? And they do all of these.
A school board.
Exactly.
It's a school board.
Exactly. Right? And so, yeah, Fort St. John has that. And I was part of that when I lived there. And then I moved down towards Dawson Creek. And I was like, well, now I'm part of 2 homeschool communities.
Yeah.
And so I switched over to Dawson because it was closer to home. And also we're a hobby farm. And the cultural setting was more what we were doing. Right? And so it worked better for us because we're associating with the other homeschool families who are doing what we're doing. And so we can share projects and we can share experiences and help each other. And like my son's raising the goats that you talked about at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
And through this homeschool community, well, there's my favorite goat lady, and she knows everything there is to know about goats, you know?
So it's a real good way of networking too.
Oh, it's fabulous for networking. Yes. And everyone has each other's backs, and you can say, hey, I'm looking for this book, or I'm looking for what I should do for math for my kid. This is how he learns. And you'll have like 8 or 10 people pipe up and share. And one thing I love about it is that people aren't nasty like they are in some of the social networking groups, right? Like everybody's out there to really support each other. There's an I've got your back attitude. And I don't know why that happens in homeschool groups, but it generally does in any of the ones I've seen.
Common goal.
I think so.
People definitely soften when they have, I think, a bit of a community feel with a certain objective or goal that they want to achieve, right?
Exactly.
They feel like they're now part of something that's bigger than just themselves.
Yeah, and it can be very diverse. Like the Dawson Creek homeschool group that I'm in, you have people who are home educating for religious reasons. You have people that are home educating for diagnosis reasons, like the ADHD or autism. You have people who are unschooling, and you have people who are completely non-religious, non-concerned about any of this, but they just want to educate their own children for other things that they've seen in schools that they want to keep their children from. And they respect each other. It's like, yeah, that's your reason for doing it, and this is my reason for doing it, and we're okay with that, and we're going to just help each other do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Support each other.
Yeah.
So how, for those who want to have maybe that standard, like as far as making sure the curriculum and the tests are being taken, I guess it'd be credentials or credits. I don't even know what you would call it, but the ability to make sure that certain subjects and grades are completed and recognized, by the government. Is there a website or is there a way to like? Do you have to go to a school
Yeah, you can go just to the BC government website and look at education, and you can look at homeschooling there, and it will lay out a description of what. So there's registered homeschooling, which is where every child has to be registered somewhere by October 1st each year. So you have lots of time to decide where you're going to go. And even if you're already registered, you can change and you can move your child to another place. In fact, you can actually move schools, I think, anytime before December 31st in a school year, and generally not have too many problems because the child's funding will move with them. Their provincial funding will move with them.
So is that like within a school district?
Within the entire province. Like I'm registered with a school that's in Kelowna, right? And so I registered my kids back in March, but if for some reason we decided we wanted to move to a different school, so long as I inform my school I'm leaving and the school I'm going to by October 1st, full funding will move with my children to wherever I'm going to, and full funding will be released from the government for their education. If I move between October 1st and December 31st, I believe it's 50% of the funding will be kept with the first school I was registered with and 50% with the next. And then I did move my children 1 year from one school to another. And so then I negotiated with the first school, and they were willing to personally transfer the funds that they retained to the school I was moving to. but that's a case by case.
Okay.
Right?
So that school is the funding. What part of the funding are you talking about?
So in the province of British Columbia, my numbers may be a little off because I pulled these numbers about 3 years ago.
Well, we can take a peekaboo
You
if you
could
want.
try to find them, or I can just give you rough numbers.
Sure.
But if you're a child in a public school,
Yeah.
the government gives the school roughly $12,000 per year for the child.
Really?
Yes. A homeschooled child, on the other hand, only gets about, I think it's $1,200 funding.
Wow.
And so
Is that because the 12,000 is supposed to account for like a school system, so that the building and the resources that go into what it takes to have that system going?
yes, to a large degree. About 4 years ago, every child actually had a fund of about $4,000. And the BC government passed some legislation to decrease our funding dramatically. We lost 79% of our funding as homeschoolers, home educators.
That's a head, eh?
And that, yes, it really was a punch in the guts.
Yeah.
And it was right in the document. I found the document and I pulled it up because I'm like, what is going on? And it was right in there. And it was actually kind of funny to read it, because the document declared that we want to decrease funding for home education because we don't feel it's fair for some children to have a superior education.
Oh, really?
And we want to push more children into the regular school
Oh, man.
by increasing funding there and decreasing funding here. So it was really a try to create a social shift, but it backfired. And in all honesty, COVID was one of our best friends, because all of a sudden a whole bunch
That
of
was
people...
a huge explosion. Oh, well, a
Yeah.
need into people wanting to make sure their kids aren't going to fall behind.
Yes. And it's important to state that COVID schooling is not the same as homeschooling. You have parents who are thrown in to trying to figure out how to do this at home with their children with very little support and a panicked situation with lots of scary stuff going on all the time.
Yeah.
It's totally different than if you're planning your school year from March and you got all this time and you got these teachers and you got all these resources and you sign up and you get your programming and you get your funding. Completely different story.
Well, yes,
So if you've-
the application. I mean, it'd be like looking at a teacher coming into class last minute and just scrambling. I mean, that's not going to be good for anybody.
No, right? It's kind of like, here's a pair of water skis. Hold on to them really tight. I'm
Exactly.
throwing you off the boat. That's COVID homeschooling, But, with us, it's like you get training, you get help, you get people coaching you, and you get people who did it and had been through it, and the experience is great. Like, it's a wisdom thing that just gets passed on, right?
What do you think is another reason why people aren't able to do it?
I think it's mostly fear. They're afraid they can't. They're afraid that they're not going to be able to do what a teacher does. I don't know everything that my grade 9 kid needs to know, but I have learned not to be afraid to march into the school year with him, because if he needs to learn it, I'll sit down and I'll try to learn it with him.
Yeah.
And if it's over my head, for example, I'm like, pretty much anything you run into in English, I'm going to be able to help you. But when you get into the higher maths, you're going to have to ask Dad.
You're going to need help. Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to be able to do all this calculus stuff. I did a bit of it, but that's not my gift. Yeah. And for me to sit down and learn it with you when I've got 4 other kids I'm trying to homeschool in the hobby farm, it's unrealistic. Yeah. However, I know that I can set you up to learn what you need to know. It doesn't have to be me that teaches you. We're, as homeschoolers or home education parents, we're not teachers so much as we are administrators of the education for the children, right? And we network, we find sources, and we open the doors and we give the children what they need to learn, and they learn because they want to learn. It's natural.
There's probably something that's a lot more handy and a sustainable and just an overall good experience, especially when you get into the older grades, 10, 11, 12, when you're getting into a higher level of learning that I don't think a lot of people retain because, you've gotten on with life and there's a lot of things you don't remember, but at least you have that resource and that ability to be able to make sure that, that information is being covered, and it's not up to you 100% to make sure you know it well enough to teach it.
It's my job to make sure that he learns it.
Yeah.
It's not my job to actually necessarily teach it. There are some things I am good at teaching.
Yeah.
And I've learned to recognize that in myself. And so there are certain things that I do teach my children. I teach them right raw from what I create. And it's really a lot of fun for me. I can pull one out of the box, and that is in our social studies. And it actually becomes a very encompassing study. My children love what we have called country studies. And so each year we've picked a list of countries that we want to study. And the first year we did 10 countries over the winter. And so we'll take a country, and for that month, we're going to dig into learning about that country. We're going to find recipes, and we're going to try to cook that food. We're going to look up artwork in that country, and we're going to start creating artwork, whether it's beadwork or fabric painting or whatever, right? Something. Yeah. And I mean, the internet's a huge resource. You can find so much stuff. And then we would use movies. And I think my girl's favorite one was when we studied India. And we found this movie, and it was actually made in India. And it was about these two little kids, and they got lost. They got separated from their parents somehow. I think what it was somebody tried to actually kidnap these two kids. And they escaped. And the little girl... Oh, no, that's not what it was at all. I beg your pardon. The little boy was blind, and he needed eye surgery. And so they begged their uncle to drive them across India to get eye surgery, and he only got so far with them. And then the older sister helped the younger brother walk the last few kilometers.
Oh, wow.
And it was based on a true story.
Cool.
And it was really cool. And my kids just loved it because they got to see culture and landscape. And you have to be careful when you're picking movies if you're using them for education. And I have a few websites that I love to go to. One is pluggedinonline.ca. And you can pretty much find a majority of movies on there, and they give very solid reviews on there. And that one is from a Christian perspective. So you'll also get some of the opinions of the reviewers from that perspective. And then the other one is just imdb.com, and you go to the parent guide on any movie, even the ones in the theater, fresh out, and it'll tell you how many swear words are in there, how many scenes, the violence, the gore, everything.
Detailed rating.
Just a detailed list without giving away the movie.
Yeah.
And I'll look at that and I'll go, that one, my kids can handle that. That one, I don't want my kids to just have to handle that. And so it works really well for when you're trying to pull movies to use as part of your education, to go to some of those sites. But yeah, so back to the country studies, and my kids just ended up loving this. The girls dressed up and carried bowls around on their head and tried to learn how to do that.
Oh, wow.
We cooked this spicy food, and the kids loved that. And we did the artwork, and we watched a couple of movies. And so we did a different country each month that one winter. And we came around to the next winter, and the kids were like all over it. They wanted to do that again. And so then we said, okay, well, let's go through the alphabet this month. And we tried to find a country somewhere around the world for each letter of the alphabet, and a different one that we'd never done before. And it ended up really fun. And we learned about places we didn't know about, that they even existed.
I'm sure you did too.
Oh, absolutely.
That would be quite a learning experience for everybody.
Right? And that's part of the fun of it, is I get to learn with my kids. It's almost like I'm back in school.
Well, that's social studies.
Exactly.
Is what you're talking about there.
Yeah. And so then we're getting the cooking in, we're getting the crafting in. So it covered home ec, it covered arts and crafts for the year, like some of the artistic stuff. It covered the social studies, it covered geography. And when you get into doing these kind of what we call in homeschooling unit studies, you cover a whole bunch of stuff and you tick off a whole bunch of those requirement boxes, and you didn't even know you did it. You just had fun.
Cool.
Yes.
That's cool. So what about those people who are just too busy? Like, you have usually dual income homes, and so the parents, which is I think the underlying issue, or not issue, but reason why you start seeing a lot of shifting, because we're getting into where it's like a lot of reasons why people aren't able to teach their own kids. So you're crossing over into kids learning by their peers.
Yes.
There isn't as much interaction. I thought it was kind of funny when it comes to being social, because I find that in the public system quite often, the kids are almost being raised by other kids, and you start running into a lot of other issues.
Yes.
That seem to result obviously in, people that turn into adults having a lot of problems they may not have had earlier if they had a little more support in the home base.
Yeah.
You don't have parents raising kids. It's a tough one to do, and it's a wild balance.
Yes.
But for those parents who want to, but they can't because, they're working 10 hours a day or 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
There's a few ways that I've seen parents solve that. I'm fortunate where, well, I don't know if you would want to say it that way, because it's a matter of choice. Because what are you willing to sacrifice? For me to stay home and homeschool my kids, yes, I've sacrificed having a personal career. Before I had children, I worked for the airline. And my husband and I could literally fly anywhere in the world for the taxes on a ticket. And we went to Egypt for our honeymoon, and we spent $600 on our combined airfare from Dawson Creek to Cairo, and I laid that down because we wanted me to be home for the children. And it's a sacrifice. It's not easy to give that up because your career can be part of your identity in a huge way. And you have to separate that in your own mind and know that you're of value, even if you don't have a specific career that you're pursuing. And know that you are giving value back to the world that me running a ticket counter couldn't possibly do. I am helping 5 people become the best version of themselves they can be. And it doesn't all depend on me, but for sure I'm a big part of that in their lives. And then from there, we're a single income family. How are we going to make ends meet? And that's where we grew into the hobby farm. We're at a point now where we have worked really hard for 9 years, and I am basically producing about half of the food that we need to eat in a year off of our farm.
Holy smokes.
Cost-wise, right? And it's hard work. My children have learned hard work, mostly from watching me, more so than from doing it. But they have their chores, and they've learned, they've learned how to take a sick lamb because it was free, and feed it a bottle and feed it medicine and turn it into this great big fat ram that they really want mom to take to the butcher because they're done with it, and they were in love with it at first, but now they have helped create their own food. And there's ways to be frugal, and there's ways to tie into your community and cut costs. And, sure, go buy some jeans at the thrift store, go to Grand Prairie, and, go to Value Village because you're going to spend $20 on nice jeans instead of 120.
Yeah.
And it's okay to make those decisions because you are creating something that can't be created any other way by being there for your children. You have an investment in them that nobody else does. You have awesome teachers out there, and there are many teachers I know and love and respect, and they do a great job, but nobody can be as invested in your child as you.
Yeah.
That's your child. That's your gift from heaven. And it was given to you and entrusted to you because you can do it. And we have so much self-doubt. And yes, we're going to make mistakes. A huge part of the whole process is acknowledging your mistake. Like after going from grade 1 to grade 3 with my second child, realizing that I was just pounding on him and not helping him get an education. When my eyes opened to that, I went to him and I got on my knees in front of this little boy and I said, I am so sorry. I have been doing this wrong. And children forgive you so quickly. And they also, you win their respect when you acknowledge that you've made a mistake. And from that day forward, I was like an instant healing on our relationship. And we started looking for ways that he could learn that worked for him.
Yeah, it's I mean, not something I think you need to take on 100% on your own, because we all learn. And it doesn't matter the age group that you're in. I mean, you're still learning at 50, 60, 100. And the mistakes aren't really always all that bad, because it creates a learning experience.
That's right. And
Right?
if I hadn't gone through that,
without mistakes, I don't think we would be where we are now. And that's why science is what it is because obviously there were mistakes and you never hit it spot on every time. So
oh no,
I get that aspect for sure. And
yeah,
I think what some people they grapple with when you're, trying to think about a family unit as a whole is the ability to be able to do something like that, especially if, people are living in town versus rural.
Yes.
And that whole management of it, because some people, I think, grapple with the whole aspect of losing all those moments.
Yes.
Of being there for the family and raising their children and being a part of that. Because there's a lot there that is satisfaction on its own. I mean, there's a lot of regret down the road if you miss the birthdays or the sports or whatever. Other people, I think, have a little bit of a different perspective where they're okay with, working and being able to provide a living, but still have the concern about, a lot of the public system, how it's set up, maybe where it doesn't align with their value system and the principles, and still looking for different avenues for options, like how do you provide quality education, and that balancing act that goes in with it. I mean, that's a very difficult thing to maintain. It is, and each
situation is going to be unique, right? Like I've read about some people who they do both work, but she's a night shift nurse and he's a daytime guy, and so she's gone at night, but he's home and watching over the kids. And then during the day when she's home, she'll get the kids started on their stuff. They'll do what they can. She'll take her sleep, and they overlap, right? And it can be very difficult. You can be like ships passing in the night, right?
Yeah.
But there's other people who have work arrangements where they're in an office, and so their kid can be in the office and they can work on their schoolwork right there, right? And there's, you're not having to carry around an entire school of books in your backpack. You can basically get your kid a good tablet and sign them up for some online courses and you're good to go. Some families, they will use their favorite school in town, and they can take their kid in on certain days for certain classes, and that's when they go to work. And then other days they fill in with some of the homeschooling. So it's kind of a mixture that goes on of using classes and using home, depending on the schedule of the work as well, right? And just fitting that together like a puzzle, and everyone's life is a puzzle.
Yeah.
And it's about being flexible and trying to find the pieces that can fit.
I think the flexibility almost is kind of built into a system too, where if you're able to swing that and it seems like it's overwhelming, then you're able to maintain, I think, trips too that allow you to be able to travel and camp. It's not really a structure from the school year, and maybe the timeline from 8 a.m. till whatever, what school to go out to, I think 3, whatever the timeline is, seems to be different depending on the area. But you know what I mean? Like you have that ability not only to be a bit more flexible on the timing, but if you're also packing all that curriculum and standard of education into a shorter period of time, it frees up a whole lot more.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to be crammed into just maybe 3, 4, 8 months out of the year. It could be spread out with 4 hours a day over a longer period.
And you've hit
maybe kind of hit a few more Kevin, up front, and then
a lot of homeschool families will tell you that we start school in October and we finish in April, and we do 4 days a week. And you're like, how on earth do you do that? Like when you compare that to how many hours a child's in school, but you have no waiting in line for anything. You have no waiting for the teacher. You don't have to go at the pace of the slowest person in the room or the slowest group in the room. If you're good at a subject, fly at it. be done in February, or whatever. And so your time, you have so much more time. You don't have travel time to and from school, waiting for a bus at a bus stop, sitting on a bus. It's kind of funny because I pointed out the school bus to my kids because the bus driver for our area lives right across the road from us. And they're usually, in the winter, just barely crawling out of bed. And he's gone. Yeah. He's driving. I'm like, see that? There goes the school bus. And then it's like we have our breakfast and we get dressed and we do our school and we do our chores. And there's the school bus coming back. And they're already done everything and on to free time, playtime. And they're like, wow, I would have been gone from you all that time, Mom. Yeah. Right? And it is a long time.
Oh, it's a big day.
Right? It is a big day. And you don't realize how many lost hours are in there until you cancel that and sit at home and go, okay, now what do? I did 4 hours of school and everything's done. Right? And I would say that's for younger grades. Now that my son's getting into grades, 8 and 9, he's needing more time per day. I'd say he probably needs 6 hours a day, right? 4 days a week, but he's also learning 2 musical instruments in that time. He's doing double science in that time, pursuing what he really wants to pursue, right? And so cooking lunch for me because I'm teaching the kids.
Culinary.
Exactly.
There's culinary skills there.
For your home ec this term, you will cook lunch every day.
Well, that's a good thing. I mean, these are also things that are missed. You don't get that typically. Like they were talking about kids that are going to school and they're, without a lunch and you've got, hot lunches being served. And Jody goes to the school quite often and sees a lot more of that where kids are showing up and they don't have any food. And what about that aspect?
The food?
Well, now you're dealing with, a whole swath, and I'm trying to, this conversation kind of covers a huge demographic, right, of people. The people that, are sending their kids to school without the ability to even eat.
That can be challenging.
How does that, have you seen that within the homeschooling world where maybe there's a support system with a lot of people that have, because I've heard 2 sides of the story, and that's kind of where the question comes from. Because I even grew up in a family that was, we didn't have on the pay structure, whatever you want to say, we're fairly poor, but there was almost an advantage with homeschooling. Whereas I've heard the argument for the exact opposite is that with the pressures and schedules that people have. School is a huge resource that allows them to be able to send their kids off. They go to school. They don't have to worry about them. They get their education. And that's, I think, a little bridge too far for some people who aren't able to take that on. And you hear the 2 sides of the story. But have you seen that now in, with your support system where maybe there's a bit of a misconception with that once you get into a group of people that can help out and manage that a little bit better?
Like I really haven't seen any family fall through the cracks in basic necessities, right? Like that community, that homeschool community, everyone's really got a very family-based value system to start with. And they want their family to thrive, but they want your family to thrive too, because your family is their family's community, and there's this recognition that you need community for healthy development of your children, right? For the most part, there are the odd, weird, unsocialized homeschool families that prefer isolation, and that's okay. That's their choice. I actually grew up partly that way, right?
Yeah,
and some of it was fine, and some of it, there was stuff I had to deal with and learn differently as an adult. But I did, because I had the skill of teaching myself and learning myself and propelling myself forward, right? And so if you have, this is a bit of a rabbit trail from what you're asking, I think, but if you have somebody who's like isolated like that, and they do kind of go down that side way of staying isolated, they've still given their children this ability to take care of themselves, to find their own way forward, right? And in doing so, when they come out the other side, they'll figure something out. Whereas if you're in a system that takes care of everything for you and you are isolated or down in the dumps at the other end of that, you're going to sit there until somebody picks you up, right? And so there's something that happens in home education where you're giving your child the gift of self-development and of saying, this is where I am, but I know I can get myself over there, right? Or I can ask somebody to help me get there. If I find the right person, I can look for the right person to help me get there, right? And so there's a different mindset that happens for the kids as they grow up and as they develop. And I think that is hugely valuable in the success of their future. I don't know if that really answers the question you're
for sure.
trying to put out there.
Have you seen people, have you had a lot of people ask if maybe you can take on more kids? And
I have.
I bet you that's an explosion now where all of a sudden that could almost turn into a little bit of a,
yes,
you're a school.
Yes, and I've looked into that, and provincially, the regulation for that would be I would be allowed to take up to 9 children and home educate them. I can enroll them, receive the funding, do the education, give the reporting to my support teacher. My support teacher reviews that I have done what I'm supposed to do, writes the report cards, and submits them to the government, right? So this child is passing their grades and moving forward, right? Up to 9 children, I can do that. After 9, I have to get some sort of a teaching certificate and permission. And
I think you're going to see a lot more of that. It seems like there's a lot of people reaching out for other options when it comes to...
Yeah, and the other thing I can do, which I'm hoping to actually step into this year, is I found out from the school that I'm enrolled with. I'm enrolled with HCOS, which is Heritage Christian Online School. And they're a Christian school, but they're not picky about who enrolls with them. If you want to enroll with them, that's fine. They do have a requirement for some biblical studies, but it's not heavy-handed. It's not shoving anything down anybody's throat. So they're very open in that way. But this might surprise you. Last year, we were a school of over 4,000 students provincially. Yes.
That is surprising.
We're not little.
Well, no, that's, like I said, there's a lot, it's becoming a lot more of a common thing.
And so,
go ahead.
Yeah, what I was going to say is we have teachers who are trained with a school, and they're actually registered teachers in the province that set themselves up in different communities, and they are like the resource center for that community. And so Fort St. John has a teacher like this, but Dawson Creek doesn't. And so as a homeschool mom registered or enrolled with HCOS, I can set up classes. I can give an outline of what I'm going to teach to my school. They will stamp it with their stamp of approval. People can register and pay the fee, and then I get paid a teaching fee. And so essentially, I can homeschool like individual workshops and classes in my community, inviting
very cool
as many children as I think I can do, 20, 25, every Friday.
Isn't there
or whatever.
A school in Beldonald that kind of does something similar to that?
There probably is. There are quite a few groups that do this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
has
that can also be an answer for people, like you were saying, who are struggling to want the homeschooling but are working. And they can tie in to these homeschool communities and find these kinds of things going on. And, you know, hey, I need something on Fridays because that's when I work. Or I need something Tuesday to Thursday because that's when I work. Who's out there that can, you know, and families are really good. They'll be like, drop your kid off here. They can do their school along with my kid. And, you know, like your people that are living in towns and cities. Yeah. They can network and it works. You got 2 families and it's like, okay, all the kids are at this house today and that house tomorrow and maybe the third house another day. And now everybody can work. Yeah. Right? Especially if it's part-time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's important to know that, because also I guess one of the biggest things I guess people are voicing concern about, and it seems to be the elephant in the room all the time, is we got to keep it curriculum based, right?
Right.
It's especially in the school system now, there's a big shift into, you know, different social aspects where things are being taught that aren't specifically about the curriculum itself.
Yes.
And people are starting to become concerned, whether it's warranted or not. And there's alternatives starting to be,
Examined.
sourced out.
Yes.
And whether you agree with how the mainstream, public school system is going, that's fine. It's just, I think you should be okay with the fact that when it's going so far into other avenues that are everything but curriculum based, it's going to be at some point in time, it's going to hit on something you strongly disagree with.
Right. And what are you going to do at that point?
Exactly.
Yes.
And so when you start going into all these different avenues and you're losing maybe we're trying to teach curriculum that is based off of, I guess, traditional things, math, science, culture. It's gonna end up going into an area that I don't think everybody is gonna end up having an agreement with. So when it goes into the homeschooling end of things now, I think that's the exact same perception. They go, well, it's either it's not about the curriculum, or maybe it's a Christian base, or maybe it's not based, it's got these different avenues that a lot of people don't know about.
Yes.
And that's, I think, where the concern is when it comes to trying to make sure that, the children are being taught what they need to learn to be able to become, successful, educated adults.
Yes. I would say that there are multiple curriculums you can work with that all meet the requirements. And at the same time, no single curriculum is going to line up perfectly. Every teacher and homeschool parent has to mix and match a few things. There'll always be like a gap here or a gap there. I have an awesome math program that I use for my kids because marking math was taking several hours a week. And so I was like, I need these hours for other things. And I found an online program, and it tutors the children through their math, and it's awesome. But it has a couple of learning gaps in it. And so I was given that heads up from our teacher in the area. And I was like, okay, so I'll make sure I cover those somewhere else. And I'll make sure that I have that dealt with in another way. And I'll just back up here. There's two things. There's registering, which is where you just register your child with the province and say they're getting an education. You just declare that. As a parent, you can do that. Depending on where.
So you're say that again. You're just telling the province that.
Yeah, you make a declaration that I am responsible for my child's education.
Yeah.
But we won't be reporting any learning outcomes to the province.
Oh.
It's almost like undercover. And so you can totally go off board like that. Up until grade, I think it's 8, nothing that your child learns and reports to the government actually goes towards their grade 12. It's just a year-by-year report card for your benefit and theirs.
Oh.
To say, yeah, we know this. Once you get to grade 9 and up, then you start having to have recorded grades in order to get your dogwood, which is your grade 12 diploma. And that's when you need to be enrolled, not registered. Because under enrollment, you are now accountable for meeting the points that are required for the grade in educating, in showing work, in doing testing. And then usually what you do is you have a middle person. So there's me who's doing this administration and teaching with my child. And then we take his work samples, and he has maybe a couple of Zoom meetings per year with what was called our support teacher. Our support teacher takes all of this information, puts it into a report card, lets us know where the gaps are, says, I need something to cover your French learning, or I need something to cover this social studies gap. You didn't cover this in science, And so then we'll go, okay, we just forgot to put that in, or we did. And here's a cool thing, is that if I've missed something with one of my kids, anything that we have done in the previous 2 years that covers it can be pulled out of the files and presented, and it will check that box off. And if I miss it, I can also use up to the next full year to come back and cover it.
Really?
There's a lot of space in there.
That is super cool.
Yes.
Because that covers, or it doesn't cover, sorry, it more or less, I think, addresses that bit of attention or anxiety about making sure that you're teaching your kids absolutely everything.
That's right.
Within a certain timeline.
This has completely changed how I approach science. For example, when a child is in grades 2 to 6 in school, you're going to cover something with animals, something with earth science, something with chemistry and physics, something in all of these different categories of science, right? But you're really just touching on each of these things, and you don't have time to dig in deep with any of them. I homeschool my kids differently. Each year, they pick a branch of science, and we dig in deep on that branch. And then I touch a little bit here or there on one or two things just to say, yeah, we're not dropping that completely. But now because I've dug in really deep, for example, last year, my middle child, she got really excited about chemistry and physics. And she dug into this curriculum I had. And she did amazing. She had these little goggles that she put on and these little rubber gloves, and she was doing these experiments in my kitchen using all my vinegar and all my baking soda and all my salt and everything else she could find. And she went through this chemistry and physics so well that when I present that to my support teacher, well, she has simply covered chemistry and physics for like 4 years, because she's dug into it.
Yeah.
And she's done a great job with it.
It's an interest.
And she was interested, and she flew with it, and she learned more than she would have if we had stretched that learning out into a couple of weeks each year from grade 2 to 6. Oh. Right? And so
that's
you can
one of the
really
things that
dig in.
people have a hard time with is keeping the kids engaged.
Yes.
Right? I mean, how do you do that from one day to the next? I mean, you see that that's one of the things in public schools that you get that huge level of disengagement. It's boring, or they just don't understand it. And as soon as you don't understand something, and it's a foundation to understand something else. Yeah. Oh, you're done. I mean, that child is. So that's kind of where I was a little curious too, because a lot of people, I don't think really start and set up with homeschooling. Usually it's something that is a concern that's built.
Yes. And sometimes they switch into it quite suddenly, so they feel lost.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because it's a maneuver out of necessity instead of I think something that is a value-based system. It's people are like concerned enough to where all of a sudden it's an issue, and that can range from.
I need to make a change.
Like what we talked about. Maybe there's concern of maybe the structure of the school. I know a lot of people have concerns with, the fact that their children are being pushed through the grades, regardless of whether they understand what's going on. They go from 1, 2, 3.
My kid can't write and he passed English again.
Yeah. And now this same child is in grade 10, where all of a sudden you have to hit a certain standard.
Yes.
To be able to pass.
That's right.
And now they're failing.
And the thing that can happen in
through the
school
system.
Is that kids learn at different rates, right? And you'll have someone who's linguistically strong, and they're going to be right on, and they're going to be acing their English and their language arts studies right through all of their grades, but they might be really struggling with math, right? And so they don't have the chance to work ahead in the English because they're doing great with it and slow down in the math. They're like at this pace that is laid out for them, like a schematic, right? And when you're homeschooling, there's this beautiful thing that can happen, and that is, like with one of my kids, I held him back in math. And I gave him math that didn't have a grade level written on it so that he wasn't judging himself. And I held him back. And for up to about grade 5, he needed to be back a full grade level. And that was where he was functioning. And then all of a sudden, he broke through.
Yeah.
And he jumped ahead 2 grades.
Well, sometimes there's an aha moment, right? Things click sometimes
at certain times.
Exactly.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you're off to the races. Once you get over that certain whatever it is, you're like, I got that.
Yes, exactly.
Away you go.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing with homeschooling is that you can go slower until that kid gets that aha moment.
Yeah.
And then you can let him loose. You can open the gates and let him run for it.
Do you know what I think I've seen that was somewhat similar to homeschooling that's in the public system is the ELC in Fort St. John, grade 10. It's the only grade that is, and our daughter went through that. And at first we were wildly apprehensive of that, because when the ELC first started, it was, supposed to be for the problem kids that were failing, and it was, the ones that they're gonna pretty much fail, and this is a little bit of a transition. Exactly. And
they're gifted.
It turned into the exact opposite, where now it was a different approach on learning. It was a little bit more, instead of the classroom setting, they could show up or they couldn't. Like, it wasn't like so much structured.
Yes.
But the application was what we'd call, I guess, hands-on.
And more project-based.
Exactly. It's
Yes.
project-based, and they thrived.
Yes.
And then they go back into grade 11 and 12, and it's back to the exact same way of learning again. And all the kids that I've heard going through the ELC wish that they could have gone that way, but it was just grade 10 in Fort St. John is and that's the only way.
Yes.
And I found that interesting, because past that, it's actually where
that's where you kind of need to use it.
Not only that, but why is there so many? And I'm hoping somebody can give me an answer on this, because I know a lot of people question why there's so many schools being built and are covering everything up to grade 10. And it covers in this area specifically, like in schools, 6th Street. It's not just for St. John, but it's all the surrounding areas too. Yeah. And there's one high school.
I know. Yes.
Like, where are all these kids going? Like, all these other schools are being built, and it's all going through one high school. Like, it makes you wonder what's going on with that.
Yes.
And the ELC has proven the fact that a different approach on being able to teach children is extremely successful. And I think it would be beneficial to allow that from grade 10, incorporate 11 and 12. Yeah. But it has, I think, from what I understand, a very similar application or approach, I guess, with what you were just talking about. It's project-based. It's keeping the students a little bit more accountable for themselves. Yeah. That's a very important thing to have. Yeah. Instead of being pushed, and then you never really actually figure out what the problem is. Yeah. Where's that aha moment? What happens if, 2 grades down the road, they're still hung up on that one little thing that could be very easy to kind of,
if you would slow down and go at their pace at that time.
Or a different approach.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. One of those aha moments for my first son, he's very strong in math, but all of a sudden we got to geometry and he stalled. And it was kind of like, well, this is interesting, because I hadn't seen him stall before. And he just gobbled up the math and knew it, like, well ahead of his level. And so what we actually did with, we needed to get our sheep out in the green grass. And so we went outside and we built these little wooden fences, and we made them a nice square little pen that was easy to move around, where we could take them apart and put them back together, panels basically that were light. And so then I said to him, like, okay, so how much area is in this space, right? And so then he's looking at this in a real life setting, and he's going, well, the formula I need is the length times the width, because it's a rectangle. Yeah. And all of a sudden he got it. And he understood. I'm like, okay, we're going to build 2 more panels. And now we're going to have a hexagon. What is the area? Right? And the next thing you know, he's drawing things out on paper and figuring out the best shape to give the sheep the most area of grass and still have a stable structure. And it just clicked for him, right? But we needed to get out of the classroom.
Absolutely.
We needed to get out of the classroom, and we needed to have a practical application.
Well, if you don't get it, and it's hard to be able to memorize, especially when it gets into a little bit more nuance, where it's not just memorizing a certain formula. It's how do you apply that, and how do you change those formulas?
Why do I need to know this?
Exactly.
What use is it, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Put it into application.
Yes. And homeschooling is awesome for that. You can put, a favorite one is when kids start learning fractions. You send them to the kitchen and you get out a kid's cookbook, and they're like, okay, we're going to cook, and we're going to make double this recipe, and you've got 1/8 of a teaspoon, and you've got 1/2 of a cup, and you've got 1/3 of a cup, and well, how are we going to figure this out? Yeah. What is it? And they start to visualize, and they start to see what it means and be able to do the math. And then they go back to the books, and it's like, oh yeah, I know what this is, because I did it, right?
Now it's easy.
So, now it's easy. Yeah.
One of the other things I wanted to touch on, we kind of grazed over at the beginning, was that the perception of kids not being socialized or weird.
Yes.
Okay, that I want to hit because
For sure.
I don't. That is a weird one for me that I've never really fully understood, and I'm not sure where it comes from.
Yes.
But I'll start out with, I guess, an example that I thought was pretty cool when I first met you. That we found out you guys had a bit of a social test that mimicked that show called Alone,
Oh, yes.
where there was survival skills and stuff.
Yes.
Like I left there wanting to join. Like I'm not sure if adults can do this or not.
You're not the first one who's asked
Oh
me
my
that.
God. What a hell of a good time that is. I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that, because that incorporates, you know, a lot of other kids,
Yeah.
teamwork.
Yeah.
Like we're hitting so many different nuance and levels there. So
Yeah,
tell me a little bit about that.
So some of my kids and some of their friends just love the outdoors. And they love doing things like figuring out which plants are edible and making a fire from scratch. And then, of course, you get kids seeing a show like Alone, and it's like, whoa, that's so cool. Like,
That'd be cool.
hey, Mom, why can't we do that in the backyard?
Yeah.
Just with our friends, right? And so, I mean, number one, we're a close-knit group, so we trust each other.
Yeah.
You have to have that kind of
Yeah.
a foundation, or you have to start getting into legal paperwork, right? But it was like, I don't know why we couldn't do that, right? And you talk with the other parents, and I'm like, well, I've got the space and I've got the time, and if you're okay with that for your child, let's do it, and let's iron out what we can do. And we first started with just my children, where they wanted to see if they could live outside without mom for 24 hours. Right? And I'm like, okay, that's a level 1 survivor challenge is what we called it. And the 2 boys went outside and they tried to do it, and one of them made it. And one of them came in at 2 a.m. He's like, I'm just too hungry. You know, and then the next year is like, okay, let's change it up. Let's say we can take some food with us, but we can't come in the house, and see if we can do it. And they did it, and I thought, wow, that was exciting.
This is building a shelter and a fire and everything to be able to last for 24 hours?
Well, we advanced it each year. We tried to make it a little more leveled up, right? And so at first it was just they were in their tent outside, and they had their tent.
Yeah.
And so they have a shelter already,
Yeah.
right? It's just a matter of staying outside and being tough enough to, you know, cook my own food on the fire and not be with mom.
Yeah.
Right? And depending on your age that
yeah.
you're working with,
Yeah.
right? And so each year the kids are getting older as well. So eventually, to fast forward, we got to last year where we had a group of close friends who were 10 to 15. And I think there was 9 of them. And the challenge was 7, 6. My son's correcting me in the background. He's like, it's 6. The challenge was you can take 10 items off of that same list. We copied it down off of the Alone requirements. Like if you go to the Alone TV series.
Oh, did you actually use Alone as a template?
We actually used Alone as a template.
Oh,
yes,
really?
We did.
That's
and
cool.
So we took their lists, and I'm like, okay, you guys get to pick 10 items off of here. And all the kids showed up with their gear, and I
Yeah.
went through their gear and I investigated it. And then I also made a few requirements. It's like, you have to have bug spray. It's not one of your 10 items. I know you're not going to make it through the first night without mosquito spray.
Yeah.
I'm not going to torture you. Right? And then if anybody got any injury whatsoever, even if it was a scratch, they had to come and show me so that we were taking care of the kids and they weren't getting an infection from a cut or something like
Yeah.
that. Right? And then we had some other safety rules, like they could bring water, but it was one of their items. So some kids chose not to bring water, but if they didn't bring water, they had to boil the water to a survivor safety standard of, I think it was 10 minutes of full boiling on a fire before they were allowed to drink it. So they could collect out of the rain barrel or the pond in the backyard, but they had to boil the water. And
Certain requirements, for
certain
sure.
requirements
We put
for
a
their
structure around it.
personal safety, right?
Yep.
And so we had this list of rules. We had the list of the items.
Which is good and not cheating, because that is a part of being able to make sure they're aware and the skill
right.
in making sure that they're doing it proper.
That's right.
You
And
don't
I'm like,
just
you're
throw 'em
welcome
out.
to forage,
Yeah.
but I'm going to show you the poisonous plants that grow on my property.
Yeah.
Don't touch them. Be careful. Watch out for each other. And if in doubt, whether this is a plant you can eat, make sure you come and ask me. I have a book. We'll reference it. We'll make sure. And if in doubt, we won't eat it. Nobody's allowed to eat mushrooms, by the way.
Yeah, it's a good one.
They're very tricky, and then we had fun little things that we added in there, like, well, if you happen to be able to steal eggs out of the farmer's chicken coop without him catching you, you can have them, right?
Oh.
And so we had kids getting up at 4 a.m. and going and sneaking eggs out of the chicken coop without waking up the dog, So there was fun things we added like that, and they had to build a fire and cook their food, and it was neat because I would go out each day and I would check on their health, and several times a day, actually, because I want to make sure they're good and make sure they're drinking enough water. They're hungry, obviously, but water was a big thing because I don't want anybody getting dehydrated. That's dangerous. And one boy started to get dehydrated. And I was like, I can tell you're getting some early signs of dehydration. I'm going to pull you. And the other kids, like, it was funny how they all entered. They're in competition with each other. Yeah. Who's going to outlast each other, right? Like, they're really going in at it like this. And by the second day, 2 little groups had formed that were like buddying up with each other out of the 6 kids. And then we were going late on the second day, and this boy was coming with some dehydration. And the other kids all came around him, and I was like, I have to pull him. And they're like, well, how long can we have to help him want to help him be okay? I'm like, he has to have a full liter of water and say that he wants to stay. And you have 1 hour. And those kids worked together. One of them went fishing and caught a fish and cooked a fish for him out of our backyard pond. Somebody boiled him water.
Wow.
Somebody sat there and talked with him. And it was an incredible thing.
Survival.
That happened. All of a sudden, they didn't want to see somebody fall. And something ignited in them. And they helped him. And his dad tells me that experience changed his life and gave him a confidence and a self-respect that he never had before.
Really?
Which was really awesome to hear.
Well, and there's a different, I think, realization to the importance with teamwork.
Yeah.
Strength in numbers. You can't do it all.
You can't do it alone.
So if you let, people start to, phase out and you go from, let's say, 6 or however many strong down to 1 person, I guess, of course, the goal is the winner. But there's also another aspect too, where if that's the goal and it seems to be unattainable with just 1 person, then you come together.
Yeah.
And through teamwork and the ability to be able to, learn the foraging, understanding of different things, like what you're talking about with nutrition and water, they come together, and that's the team that is far stronger in the long run than it is just with one person.
Yeah. And you have like the kid who could actually go out there and find the food. Well, he could keep it and he could win. But they found out pretty fast that their biggest enemy was boredom. And if they're just sitting out there alone waiting for the hours to pass by and nobody has a watch, because it wasn't, one child had a watch and everybody loved him because he knew the time.
I have learned my lesson on that one. We've gone camping and didn't have time. That sucks, especially up here when it gets daylight at like 2 a.m. and then you wake up and you don't know if it's 3 a.m. or 8.
Right? And it's like, I'm hungry, but I know I'm going low on food on purpose. So should I eat more of my rations or should I not?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so you have this one kid in the group who's really good at finding food or catching the fish in the pond. And he's like, no way, I'm not going to keep this for myself. I'm going to bring it back to the tribe and I'm going to boost everybody because that's what's going to keep me going. Otherwise, I'm going to be alone out here, and I don't want to be alone out here.
No, nobody likes listening to coyotes howl at night by themselves, do they?
Not really. Yeah.
No, I like that. I think there's a lot there that is pretty cool because not only are you teaching all those skills,
yes,
but through necessity, you're creating bonds.
Yes, and you're helping them.
Those are very, very hard to be able to mimic any other way.
And you're taking away certain ideas, like I'm pretty awesome and I can do this and I want to do this. I want to be a winner. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you realize I actually don't want to be a winner as much as I want my whole gang to make it through this. It would be far more rewarding for me to go and share the last of my gallon of water with the boy who's getting dehydrated and see him reach the finish line with me than to walk through it with leftover water. Like there's that
bond. It's that bond and that ability to be able to succeed through teamwork.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've heard that there are children who want to do this again this year, and they're already talking behind my back about what items they're bringing so that they can collaborate. And
rite of passage. Mm-hmm. It is. In a lot of cultures, it is a rite of passage when you go about that.
Yeah.
So the other thing, I guess, with that is you're touching on, the confidence level and morale and all those aspects. Have you noticed a huge increase when it comes to attitude, confidence, demeanor and whatnot, day to day in the we'll call it the classroom setting? When it comes to learning and a completely different energy when it comes to sitting down and learning, when you're incorporating some of those, activities.
Yes.
Instead, it's just that mundane routine. You're switching it up, and that's a pretty interesting.
And it also depends on your child. Like, you need to know the child. Some children learn really well academically. Like one of my kids, he just wants books, and he'll read, and then he'll go to his computer and he'll create graphs, and he'll take all the knowledge that he got and he'll graph it on the computer, or he'll put out the statistics and bring me a bar graph and say, hey, look at this. I went through all of the almanacs from National Geographic, and this is what I discovered about world populations or world religions, or, you can just pretty much, he's like a book machine. You just keep feeding the information in and he consumes it. So then you need to create balance with that kind of a child where, okay, we're done with the books. You're going outside. You're doing something practical. I need you to build something or repair something or, bake a cake.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But then you have the other children who are hands-on, more practical learners, and they learn really well that way. And then you need to bring them into balance by taking them to the books and say, here's how it looks when it's in a book. And when you're trying to get into, an apprenticeship for, say, welding or carpentry, you're going to need to take some exams. And here's how it's going to look on paper. You've already been doing it. You already know it. But now you need to feel confident that you can see it in a book and on a test and in a paper and handle it there.
Yeah.
Right? And so I am 100% a fan of the first thing you want to do when you start homeschooling is start unpacking who your kid is, who they were born as, basically. Like, as we grow, that kind of gets lost because we develop ourselves in different ways to cope with our environment, to get what we want in life, according to what we've been told to learn, what we've had to learn, and what we've loved to learn. But children they're raw material to a great extent, and you can see what they were born with. And it's really exciting when you just start looking at them and learning who they are, because then or you can learn yourself how to guide their learning. And it's like, when something's hard, we're going to take the way that you learned the best to learn it. And then when you've grasped it there, we're going to branch you out over in this other area where it's more difficult to learn. And we're going to add some of that in so that we can develop you in as many ways as possible. But we're going to remember who you were in the first place. And that's going to be our foundation, right? And so it's like the tree.
Yeah.
Right? What kind of a seed are you working with? What kind of a sapling are you working with? And go from there. And you can develop many things. But if you don't take that foundation of what that child has been created as in the beginning, you're kind of shooting yourself and them in the foot, so to speak.
You're giving them the tools to be able to have not only a broader understanding and knowledge of necessities and skills, but you're also, I think, highlighting interests that they have just naturally, and that's going to allow them to be able to figure out a little bit further on in life, what they're going to gravitate to. Some people probably gravitate heavily to one thing versus the other.
Yes. And a mistake that we can make as home educators is just following where the child gravitates. Because yes, you do want them to be strong in their natural giftings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But you also need to develop them in their weak areas. so that they can manage something over here.
Yeah.
Like if you're great in math, but you're terrible in music or arts or whatever, well, that's a part of your brain that you still want to activate.
Yeah.
Because at some point in your life, the activated part of your brain is going to come in useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Well, that's pretty, man. So homeschooling. I lost my train of thought on what my next question was going to be
all
there.
right.
I had it. It was locked and loaded, and I was just about to fire, and then I was like, "Matt, I just lost it."
It's okay. Yeah. I can go on with the unpacking who your kid is a little bit.
Sure.
Two of my favorite tools that I've come across is one is looking at their personality type. And there's lots of personality typing out there. Most of it's made for adults. But one that is kind of more of a grassroots one is one that basically its history is in Chinese medicine. And I don't like to go too far into any kind of spiritualism and stuff like that because I have my faith. But I like to look at people who have been wise in the past and look at the tools that they've used.
Yeah.
And this tool looks at people and sees their personalities as relating to one of 5 elements, and that is fire, water, earth, wood, or metal. And the description of those in the Chinese medicine. So your fire person is your person who comes in and lights up the room. They might be quite outgoing. They might be theatrical, artistic usually, musical, right? And that's a natural personality trait. Right? And then you might have your more metal person, and they're rigid. They want things structured. They want things straight. They like black and white. Yeah. Right? And then
you kind of referring to like personality type A, type B, type C thing?
It can kind of, that's another type of personality typing. I don't like that one for children as much.
Oh, okay.
When I'm unpacking children, I like to see them more in this sense because it shows what they're capable of, right? For example, what is fire capable of? Well, it's capable of being a candle on a table to give us light. It's capable of being a campfire where we gather around and we're all warmed by it. It's capable of being a forest fire that literally takes everything out. Yeah. Right? And so you take a child, for example, who is a fire child in this type of personality typing. And I have one of those. And he can burn down the whole house just with who he is as a person, right? But he can also be that person in the group that creates this joy and this warmth and this light in our midst that draws us close together. And I've been able to talk to him about that. I'm like, okay, are you being a campfire that's contained and gentle, or are you being a raging forest fire that's destroying other people and other things, right? And then another one is wood. Wood is a personality trait that's more driven and needs to reach a goal. And not everybody is like that. One of my daughters is like that. And so she has this need to grow like a tree does. And she needs to dig down and she needs to reach up. But what she can do in the process is she can hurt others if she's so focused on her goal that she's just barreling ahead, right? And so she needs to slow herself down and be more gentle, right? And it's the way that these, when you read the book that we'll reference later, I think you got a copy of it. Yeah. When you read the book, it unpacks how each of these personality types of child have their way of tuning out, and they become excessive of what they are. They become too wild. They become too wild of a fire. A water child is a very philosophical, deep person. They might be that quiet child that just likes to draw and think, but they can become so lost in that they actually drown themselves, and they can end up drowning others if they can't dry up a little bit, right? And so these personalities actually, they grate on each other, but at the same time, they help and balance each other. So when I have conflict with my children, I can say, I've talked to them about this way of understanding themselves. And it's like, what's going on with you right now? And it's like, well, I'm just so angry because she won't come out and play with me, right? And it's like, well, are you being a forest fire that's just burning her up? I'm like, oh, yeah, I was. I'm like, well, can you cool it down? And can you make it something welcoming? Right? And then there'll be someone who's like, well, Mom, this is the rules and this is your metal personality and it's wrong and it has to be this way and it's only this way. And I'm like, if we chop everything off and down, do we have anything left? He's like, no. I'm like, so we need to be careful how we trim this back because we don't want everything dead around us. We don't want to take the whole forest out.
Yeah.
Right? We want to trim it back, but we don't want to take the whole forest out.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's a really fantastic way to unpack, and even for myself, it helps me with dealing with other people. I'm like, that person's really bugging me, and it's because this part of their personality is grating on this part of my personality.
Yep.
Right? And so I can think about that in a more objective way and realize, okay, so to create balance in our relationship, this needs to back off or this needs to come in more. And as adults, we don't even know it, but we develop more. And what the Chinese said was that as you develop into your most mature self, you actually have developed the ability to use all 5 of these traits in your life at different times. There's times to be driven and goal-oriented. There's times to have rules and stick with them. There's times to just be a flood of water and wash everything. And there's times to be a fire. And you learn how to apply these different traits in your life and basically be socially successful, right? Like it's a really good way to develop your social understanding and how you connect with other people and to gain confidence about who you are.
Absolutely.
And then to go, hey, I feel bullied. So that person is probably a metal who likes rules because it makes them feel safe, or a wood who just really wants to get somewhere, right? And so they're making me feel hurt. So I need to just move around them and see if maybe we can find a way to work together and balance each other, or maybe I just need to give them their space, right?
Yeah.
And
psychology.
It really is. That's a good
But
way
I mean,
for
it's
it.
also, it's also, I think, the ability to have that sense of awareness and then grow and learn is huge.
Yes.
And what you're talking about, like the analogies you were using with the fire and the water or the wood. I mean, 2 things popped up when you were talking about that, which are kind of interesting. With the Chinese part, I mean, I guess what you were saying about the spiritual end of things, it's good to be aware and know a little bit about everything. I think, and the Chinese bring a lot to the table too, just like a lot of other cultures.
They do.
But to bring in the podcast, I guess Joe Rogan, he had an interesting one where it's better to be a fierce warrior in the garden than be a gardener and try and be a fierce warrior. And so I guess what they're trying to say when it comes to the fire aspect is if you have that ability to be able to, burn it down, and that very destructive, high energy, intense element and personality trait, it's better to be aware of it and have a better understanding than it is just to have that inability to be able to have self-control.
That's right.
And that filter and people say, they're just, they have a trigger, when it comes to anger and that lack of self-control. It's just that understanding of that element within the personality trait.
And what it can do.
Yeah.
Right? And when you have that understanding, well, I could be destructive, but I could also be nurturing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, who could survive without heat?
Exactly.
Right.
Well, self-control is a form of awareness, and some people say intelligence, but I think it's just awareness and understanding in a way that's going to make you a better person to be able to control and understand the environment you're in and the people you're interacting with.
And self-control is far easier when you have understanding.
Exactly.
When you're just trying to self-control because it's the rules for some reason, that's hard. But when you have understanding, all of a sudden, it's what you want. And so it's much easier to exercise that and get that self-discipline happening and then grow in it.
Well, that was just bottling it up and putting it down inside isn't good, because eventually it does come out. And sayings like straw that broke the camel's back start to come into effect, right? Because you're always under pressure and you're always trying to manage that. and you don't really have an understanding why. It's just, you're pissed off. And I guess the other part of it is the ability to communicate, because that's the way to be able to allow that pressure out.
Yeah.
And that's a skill that I think is more increasingly lacking. I know I'm developing that in a wild way to be able, like a kid, when they're learning how to communicate, they pout. That visual aspect you're talking about, they're just pissed off, and they're going to sit there with their arms crossed, and they're going to sit there. You go, well, what's wrong? And they're like, nothing.
Yeah.
But when they start to have that understanding, like the fire, okay, why is that happening?
Yes.
And then now explain that to somebody else, and that communication, they're going to feel better, and they learn in that process.
Yes.
And it's all because in being able to have a better understanding of why you're upset, how to manage that, it gives you the ability to be able to control and navigate and work with it a lot easier than that pressure that is still there, but you're bottling it up. And the more you're pushing against it, it's going to just come out in a way that it's not very good.
No, you can't. You can't just put things in a bottle.
No.
When it's,
so that probably manifests in other ways, like people, health, anger, anxiety, depression, probably why you have a lot of suicide now.
I know.
And like other things that are a result of that inability to be able to navigate, not inability, lack of understanding.
Lack of understanding is huge.
Yeah.
Like if we just could understand more, so many things melt away, right?
You're like the X-Men person. Where's that? That's a school where you're dealing with all those superheroes. And this is how you deal with it. We all have a superpower. Right? Isn't that
I'll open a superpower school.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. I would love that.
Yeah, the X-ray vision or the super whatever.
Yeah, and you have to learn to control it.
Yeah.
And you have to learn to help others with it, because ultimately that's what you want to do.
So how much in homeschooling and going through that whole process did you actually learn a lot about yourself and all of that? You must have learned a whole ton just in that whole process yourself.
I did. I would say the first few years were my big learning curve for sure. Like when I started with my firstborn, it was pretty smooth. I was like, oh yeah, I'm just a natural at this, right? And then my second came along and I learned better. But it took me a while, because for the beginning, there can be this concept out there that children just need to be disciplined and, get them doing what they're supposed to be doing because they're just bratty kids. And I'd say that was pretty strong in some of my previous thinking from wherever it came from. And I had to repent of that and go, oh my goodness, yes, sometimes children do need discipline, for sure. They do need help learning to contain themselves and control themselves and go in the right direction. But it's more like shepherding. I had a big learning curve there that I'm not going to be able to take a child like a piece of Play-Doh and make them into what I think is going to be the best thing. They are already created into something, and my job is to unpack who they are. I will always treasure something that another mom told me, and I think she has 8 kids, and they're older than mine, so she's down the road further. But she said to me one day, she said, just in a parking lot, one of these great conversations you have, saying hi to someone in a parking lot, and all of a sudden it's an hour and a half later and the kids are hot in the van, and you're just having a really good talk, right?
Yeah.
And
Oops. Forgot to put the windows down.
Yeah. Usually they open the doors then start hanging out of the vehicle.
Pour themselves out of the vehicle.
Yeah. And she said to me, she says, every child is a gift from God that you get to unwrap a little bit at a time. And he's already created it. And you're discovering what it is, one year after the next. And I thought that was phenomenal. Like, I had never heard someone describe children that way, and raising children and teaching children. And if you approach children like that, they're not necessarily a piece of wood to carve into something or a piece of Play-Doh to mold into something. They're something that's already created that we're going to unpack and help them teach themselves basically to be their best a version of themselves, right? And there are some things, of course, that we're going to discipline and nurture and guide. You don't want to say, oh, my kid likes to hit things and destroy things. Well, that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. That's a destructive tendency that's going to destroy them in the future. And so that's something we would hopefully be able to balance in nurturing and discipline out of that, and take our time with it. There's time, right? And my husband's best words to me were, it's a stage. Stay the course. Don't freak out over the kids. You're not failing at raising them. You're not failing at teaching them. They're going through a stage. Just stay the course, steady, gentle, true, and it'll get there.
Yeah.
Right? And he's much more patient in that way than I am. I've learned patience from him.
Well,
right?
different abilities, different gifts.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like, just with some of the examples that you've made through our discussion, though, where you've at the very beginning, had moments of regret, and you're like, ooh, you're a lot more nimble now, and you have that ability to be able to manage and recognize and navigate through all of those challenges that otherwise before that point probably would have had the pressure, anxiety, the inability to know exactly how to maybe approach or the best thing to do at that time. And you've now kind of learned enough, even, everyone's growing, to be able to navigate through all that. And that is giving your ability, it's a sense of calm.
To be more open-handed, right?
Yeah.
Like coming in and it's like you're carrying this stack of books and it's like, I'm going to homeschool.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, no, I had to learn. And you're right. I did have to grow. I had to learn to not be doing this, but to be doing this. Okay. What do we have?
Yeah.
How can we use it? How can we reach goals that we need to reach? How can we find things that inspire us and run after them? Right.
Well, that's, I think, an element that when we were talking at the beginning too, when it comes to a lot of people trying to figure out what to do and how they're going to end up starting with the homeschooling. There's a starting point.
Yeah.
And if you don't even know where that starting point is, then, eventually it doesn't really happen.
Yeah.
And not only that, but have an understanding that concern and sense of anxiety, I don't like that word really, but
there's
concern,
an anxiousness that can be there.
That's natural.
Yeah.
Everybody has that.
Yeah.
And just to try and actually, first step is taking that first step, isn't it?
It is. Close the door and drop the backpack. Yeah.
And just remember that what you were saying earlier too, is that there isn't really a certain structure or standard, especially within the first few years. And there are tools and ways about going around figuring out where the areas need more attention, what they are they, and how do you end up addressing that. And maybe some of the areas that you're doing good in, and you can be like, okay, well, at least I'm actually getting that, right? And okay, we're cool.
Yeah.
We're going to keep on working with that and building on it. And then I'm going to readdress maybe other areas that I wouldn't have if we didn't have that support system. Yeah. So what is that before we move on? Like, is that through testing? Or
Which is that?
To figure out what those areas are, maybe, your strong point is in one area and not the other. How do you go about figuring that out? Like, is that through a series of...
You can do testing if you want to. There's curriculums online where you can go and you can say, okay, I need to know what level my child is at in math. And they'll have tests online and you can do the testing and they'll say, okay, your child is at grade 3 and maybe your child in this area, right? And so there is more formal testing that you can do like that. There's also, you want to do it fun maybe with your kids. You can go online and you can go onto one of these websites that are like the 8 Smarts for Kids, and it's a quiz. And my son loves doing this stuff because it's analytical and he's analytical. And so I'm like, hey, and just a point before I go too far on this, and that is that children are always growing and developing. Yeah. So whatever you discover about them, you really need to premise it with, this is where you're at now, but you're going to grow and you're going to change. So you should probably come back and look at this again in a couple of years, and you might realize that, hey, I wasn't so smart here, but now all of a sudden I am, because that part of my brain has developed. So it's really important to have that and not put kids in a box, right? It's a wide open field, and we can branch out many directions.
Yeah.
Right? But there's these fun little quizzes, and you can go, okay, would you rather do this or do this? Would you rather paint a picture or read a book? Would you rather build something or go and play with the math blocks? You know, and you go through this little quiz, and at the end of it, it'll spit out this little formula, graph, whatever one you use, and it'll say, well, it looks like your kid is really strong with linguistic skills and musical skills and nature study, or nature smart, which is like recognizing patterns in nature. And on the other side, they are naturally inclined to mathematics, or might be vice versa, right?
Yep.
But they've created this way of looking at human mind, basically, and dividing it into these 8 different areas of intelligence. And then there's quizzes out there for adults too. I did one on myself. I'm like, hey, I want to know where I'm smart.
Absolutely. I was thinking the exact same thing when you're talking about that. I want to take one of these skills or a test.
And the fun thing you can do is you can go and you can do that, and you can go, oh, I'm weaker there than I thought. I'm going to work on that area because I want to develop my brain there. Like, unlike the personality that we were talking about a few minutes ago, personality is kind of something you're more born with, right? And it's more innate. Whereas this smartness, you might have tendencies that you're born with, but overall you can develop all of it, you know? And if you want to be mathematically smart, you can grow there. However, I guess I have to say you will reach a limit, because I know that my mathematical skills, if my husband and I were going to be put to the test and given, 2 years to be our best, he's going to beat my butt, right? But I can sit down and write a book, and he can't.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And I can definitely develop myself up to a higher level than what I am naturally. But also, this is where you can zero in on, where are you going to be a professional? Where are you going to be able to be a guru at something, And you might want to know what your natural ability is, right? For me to pursue accounting is probably not my best. But if I was going to open up a school for the gifted, I might really go.
Absolutely. Yeah. Was it Xavier? That's what it was. Professor Xavier.
Yes.
Well, that's good to know too, but there's also supplying a bit of a platform that anybody has the ability to be able to zero in and become an expert on. Mm-hmm. Right? So you want to be able to bring everything up, like what you're saying, to a certain standard. And then if there's an interest, usually an interest just highlights natural ability or tendency in some area. Mm-hmm. And skill and certain, I think, genetics or interests only bring you to a certain level. I mean, there is a lot to be said about that interest in zeroing in and building more in a certain area, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a chess expert. I mean, there are definitely tendencies in certain areas. You got to learn and build that platform out, and then you can focus into certain areas, like, that's right, or a career maybe. I mean, there's a million different examples I guess we can use, but
like, for sure, my husband's always going to be better at math, and he's always going to be better at sports. But I'm going to be better at music, and I'm going to be better at arts.
Absolutely.
And a good thing to do is take those areas where you're weak and kind of bring them up to, what would you call it? Like an average level, right? If you're weak in a couple of areas, like if I'm weak in sports, which I was when I first met my husband, and because of his strength there, he pulled me into some things. And I actually learned to golf. And I can't do very many sports very well, but I can go out there and I can golf. And now I have this area of my life that has opened up to me that wasn't there before, right? If I hadn't been willing to grow there, right? And so my husband, he kind of like jokes around that he'll never be able to learn to sing. I'm like, well, I don't care if you learn to sing, but you have natural rhythm because I've seen it in your sports. So what if I give you a hand drum and you play the hand drum while I play and sing? Yeah. Right? And then we have something we're doing together. And he's been willing to do that, which is totally awesome in my books. But yes, know who you are and what your strengths are, and pursue development in that area, but also bring up to average your weak areas so that you can be a well-rounded person.
Absolutely.
And doing that with kids, I think, is in essence true education. if you just take a kid and they know everything they need to know for a grade 12 diploma, they're not genuinely educated.
No.
They're not going to succeed.
No.
And if you take a kid and you teach them a whole bunch of stuff, but you hide all of this academics from them because you hate the school system, they're not going to be educated.
Yeah.
And so you got to let your own bias slip away and really look at the best interest for that child and give them a well-rounded education as a person, right? In intelligence, in understanding, in experiences, in connections, in academics. Yes, make sure you meet that, but teach them to learn to read and write. And then if they need to go off into apprenticeship, like my one son, I'm sure he's probably going to end up in university, right? My other, I don't think he's going to do academic high school. I think he's actually going to switch into apprenticeships and start working through his high school that way. And we can do that with homeschooling. I was worried about this. Like you said, the anxiety thing.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know how to get one kid to graduate, but I'm not sure about how to get this kid to graduate. And I got them both coming into high school very soon. I'm like, how am I going to do this? And we had a homeschool conference in Fort St. John 2 years ago. And I went and I signed up for the workshop on how to help your kid graduate through homeschooling. And I found out that there's this whole branch to the side where I can have him enrolled. He can go to Northern Lights College and do some carpentry, and he can do pottery, and he can do welding, and he can take all of the reports from all of that and bring it back to our teacher, and he can get through high school, and he can get his dogwood with very little academics and a whole bunch of apprenticeships. And I'm like, that's his path. I know it because I stopped trying to smash him into that square hole at grade 3, and I figured it out. Okay, I need to know who you are so I can help you and still have a relationship with you because that's precious. And now I do know who you are a little bit more all the time as well. And now I know how to guide you so that you don't get to grade 10 and drop out and go get a job, right? Because that happens to a lot of kids. They get to grade 10 and they're like, this is stupid. It's not going to give me anything for life. I'm just going to drop out and get a job because I can go make $20 an hour and have my truck next year that I really want to have, you know? And so I'm really excited about that. And I think that people need to know that education, whether it is homeschooling or in school, but for sure homeschooling has a really broad spectrum that you can choose from. I like to describe it as a smorgasbord. When you go to the smorgasbord, you're going to pick what agrees with your stomach and your taste buds.
Well, and
right?
it also sounds like it's not just the kids that are learning also. It's the parents or the people that are involved are enriched over it too.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And if you come in thinking, well, I'm going to figure out how to do this, I'm going to do it, it's not clean cut and dried. You come in going, I'm going to learn what I can. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to make some mistakes. We're going to not worry about that. We'll dust off the ashes and find the diamonds and move forward and learn some more. And we're going to take what we learn and we're going to share it because somebody else is going to learn from what we're learning. Right?
So a little bit of a sense of satisfaction in its own, isn't it?
Absolutely. I love homeschooling because I'm growing all the time. Yeah. And
is there a sense of pride?
I would say so. There's a sense
accomplishment with it?
Maybe not pride as much as accomplishment. There's definitely a sense of accomplishment. But that's not because it was easy.
Yeah.
That's because it was hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I want to elaborate a little bit on the pride part because that was something that I just became a little bit more aware of. It's funny how kids actually make you learn more about yourself than just about anything else in life, isn't it? And I used to always kind of wonder why my parents would be like, "Oh, I'm proud of you." Yeah. It's like, man, what the hell? Like, I got married. Oh, I'm proud of you. How are you, like, what is that?
What does that mean?
How does that, what is that exactly? And I think I have a better understanding and probably relates to like what you were talking about through homeschooling is when you're proud of somebody, it's because they've made a choice and a decision for themselves that is not easy to do. It was based off of, I think, a principle and a value that they've developed for themselves. But they were able to take the tools that you taught them to be able to actually make those decisions for themselves better.
Yes.
And it's not the fact they got to a certain place in life because of you. It's because you were able to give them the tools and the ability to be able to get there.
Yeah.
And you're proud of them because they were able to take that, and they were knowing and willing enough to be able to take the effort to get to where they were and have that sense of accomplishment for themselves. And that's when you say, I'm proud of you, where that meaning comes from.
Yes.
And I never got that before.
You know, I just thought of a really good analogy. You say, how can you homeschool if you don't know it all? Like, well, how can you coach an Olympic athlete if you can't do it yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a different role, right? And I think homeschooling is a lot like coaching. And like you say, if you have an athlete and you see potential and you help them and you push them, and then you give them the breaks they need, and you give them the guidance they need, and then you push them more, and all of a sudden they're standing on a podium with a medal. Yeah, you feel awfully proud of them.
Absolutely, exactly.
It's not your medal, it's their medal, but somehow it is your medal.
It is, yeah.
Right? Because you've coached them there, and you couldn't do what they did, but you helped them to do it.
Yeah.
And without you, they couldn't have done it, right? And it's this really, it's that kind of a relationship when you're homeschooling.
It's pretty hard to describe that in everyday conversation and language, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But as you were talking about being proud of somebody, that came to me. I was like, this is a good way to lay it out.
Yeah.
This is kind of a good way to describe it. Yeah.
That's parenting.
Yeah, that's parenting as well.
Yeah, it's a tricky animal. You know, I think the other thing to be said with that, though, too, is that you can't wear, I think, everything, too. If there's people they're accountable for themselves, and the decisions they make also is, I think, for them to have ownership on. If you've done what you can, and yet those decisions that may have resulted on the podium were made to where, you know, they have to learn a lot of things themselves, and life maybe dropped them down to a place where they need to reevaluate their own decision-making abilities and skills and accountability. It's not always for the parent to have to wear that. But at what point is that for you to try and allow that to kind of, you know...
I see what you're saying. I would say that that's a slow shift.
Yeah.
Right? Like you start out with a
Where's
child.
Where's that line? And
yeah.
Because...
And every child's going to be different.
Exactly.
In different areas.
Yeah.
Right? Like you're going to have some children who are very mature in handling themselves around their peers. And then you're going to have another child who's just totally washed away with whatever's going on around them. So you're going to set different parameters for those kids as to when I release you to go and hang out with your friends on Friday. And which friends are they? And, you know, I can trust you to choose your friends wisely, but maybe I don't trust you to stay overnight. Maybe I'm not there yet, right? And it's something you have to discuss with them. And you really, I think it's important to respect a child as a person, but also to acknowledge that they are in need of your protection, right? And there's so much out there, especially now, they have no idea about. And in a sense, you have to know about the bad stuff so that you can protect them from it. There's
helicopter parents and overbearing, and there's also ones that are the opposite of that, where, you know, it's just kind of let them roam and do whatever.
You're 18,
like
go.
The tomcat in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not good either.
No.
But where is that? And that there's a lot of nuance in that. And figuring that out from one kid to the other, and a lot of, you know, I guess.
And even where you are, like, who is your community? What is your community? Because that could change, right? Like, if I'm living in downtown Vancouver, probably going to be a bit more conservative with my kids walking the street than if I'm living in Dawson Creek, right? Then again, if it's Friday night on a full moon in Dawson Creek, my kids aren't going out the door.
No, exactly. Especially now, more than ever, eh?
Yes, yeah. So I think there's a lot of that's not just a a black and white line that you can draw.
No.
That's a huge sphere. There's a lot to consider in there, right? Right from the kid and their development and their surroundings and what could come into those surroundings, right? Because on the one hand, when you're too protective, you stifle.
Yeah.
That's like, if you have one of those little plants that you buy and it has that dome over the top, it's to help it when it's a tiny plant.
Yeah.
But if you leave that dome on,
It's going to turn into stifle.
it's going to stifle it. And eventually that plant's actually going to die.
Yeah.
Right? And you won't even be able to revive the root if you leave it on there long enough, right? And so it's a tricky thing. I go to prayer for that. That's my faith is my turn to for that. I'm like, I have no idea how to solve this problem. I'll just be honest, and I really need some help right now. And help might come to me through another person, through something I stumbled across, or just some wisdom that was not in the front of my mind, but in the back of my mind, and it needed to work forward, right? So
The awareness.
Yeah.
Sense of awareness does
Yeah.
count for, I think, helping a lot with being able to address certain things and
Yeah.
figure it out.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Speaking of figuring it out, let's go back to maybe those books. We were talking about
Yeah.
bringing those up a little bit.
Yeah, this is the one where there's a
You
video.
know what? I think this might be a good time to pause.
Yeah.
I'm dancing.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, let's pause it real quick. Okay. Isn't a pause a really good break sometimes?
Oh, it is.
It's like, "Da-da-da, another 2 hours, let's get out of here." Maybe not quite like that.
We'll eat tomorrow.
Exactly, yeah. Well, let's talk about some of these websites that we're wanting
Sure.
to highlight here.
Yes.
So which one should we start out with first?
Well, let's
here?
start with this one because it's
Okay.
really what we're about in this little talk today.
So what is this one about? This
So-
is called The Homeschool Awakening.
Yes. So this one is a movie that's come out. This is just the trailer we have up right now, but you can watch the movie, I think, on Prime Video. You should be able to get it. And I know also on pureflix.com you can also get it.
This is a movie?
It's a movie. Yes. No-
Okay, we
yeah.
should actually, why don't we watch the trailer?
Sure.
then
Let's
and
watch the
see?
trailer. Let's do it.
Yeah, because
It speaks for itself.
I'm curious about it too.
Yeah.
We have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents.
I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach.
I don't really understand this idea that parents should decide what's being taught.
Give me a break.
I always viewed homeschooling as somewhat of a cult.
Quiet, reclusive.
The different people.
Abnormal in some way.
I could never picture myself doing it.
Oh no, those are weird. I'm not doing that.
That was before we had kids. And then we had kids, and
All of a sudden, time for school, and is this really what I should be doing? Dropping them off somewhere else.
And the teacher said to me, he would not cheat off of you because you are too stupid for him to cheat off of you. My kid is not going to have that experience.
We didn't have to be a special needs teacher. We only had to be a teacher of our daughter.
The kingdom of heaven is qualifying you to speak into your children's life.
I'm responsible for what we're putting into their head and into their heart.
It changed everything.
I think as a kid, you just want to feel like you're worth it. And homeschooling says you're worth it.
The freedom we had was so worth the small sacrifice it was to teach the kids. Now, 12 years later, I realize it wasn't a sacrifice, it was a total gift.
You are in control. You get to choose curriculum, you get to choose methodology.
It's yours to shape.
You are the perfect person to teach them because you've been teaching your child since day one.
She made sure I had everything I needed. I love her so much.
No one's going to love our children more than we do.
The greatest gift that I was given was my own identity. My parents gave me that.
Go in with an adventurous spirit.
Break the mold. It's really beautiful outside the box.
It's such a great adventure.
Isn't homeschooling like public school at home? Ha! Not even close.
Cool. Show me more. Well, let's take a look at this this one here. What is this next tab? This it starts out with encouraging your child's smarts. What is that about?
So that was something that we were talking about earlier, how there's these different types of intelligence that we have within ourselves. And on this page, if you go down a little bit further, then this lady, she's actually in that Kirk Cameron movie as well.
Okay.
She's one of the people he interviews, and I really appreciate her approach. She's got a very nice, stable, solid answer for a lot of things.
So this is a spin-off of the first video?
No, this is a completely different thing. So she wrote this book called 8 Smarts, the 8 Great Smarts.
Yeah.
And she has a PhD. She's just got a really good way of laying out how to understand which ways your child is smart. Because like we were talking earlier, you have certain giftings that are going to be natural and you're going to be able to fly with those. And then you're going to have weak areas and you're going to have to slow down and work on those. And how with homeschooling, we can do that. We can hold you back in math. We can let you go forward in your socials or your science. And then when we've got the good groundwork, you're going to break ahead and you're going to be okay in this area.
Yeah.
So
is this a trailer?
That would be that would be a little preview of what her book is and what those smarts are. I think it's great to play it.
Yeah, let's play this one here too.
God is a very generous creator, and when he chose to make us and all of our kids, he chose to give us 8 different ways to be smart. And it's valuable to know that, and it's valuable to figure out if your child has a leaning and a strength in one particular area or another, so that you could maybe help them study with that smart, memorize scripture with that smart, find a way to volunteer, even a career for the older kids according to the way that they've been designed by God to be smart. How do you figure it out? What gets them into trouble is a great way. So I was a chatty Cathy as a kid, and those of us who are word smart, we can gossip, tease, name call. We always want to have the last word, and now we get paid to talk, all right? If you're educated and trained to be humble and to have Christ-like character, then you can have these strengths and they don't get you into trouble. But in reality, a lot of the smarts show up in that. You might have a logic smart kid and you know it because she put the flour in the bowl before you told her to, because she just had to know what would happen. Maybe you have a kid who is very self-smart and needs a lot of quiet, reflective thinking and isolates when excited rather than sharing with you. And you've been frustrated, which I honor that frustration in you. But pay attention to what gets them into trouble. What do they do in their spare time? Do they pet the dog? Do they read a book? Do they paint a picture? Do they walk in the yard? Do they call a friend? What do they do in their spare time? What do they spend their money on? If grandma gives them $20 as a gift, what do they want to do with that? Do they buy books, or do they buy paints and paper? Do they buy more music, perhaps, if they're more music smart? What do they excel in at school? Certainly. Are they a mathematician? Are they a scientist? Do they love history because they see it come alive in their eye? That's a picture smart kid. So when they do talk, what do they talk about? All of us are word smart. What do we talk about? A kid who's talking about science is more of a logic smart kid. How many of you have a kid who talks all day about the animals and the plants and the clouds and the color of the sky? Hello, nature smart. So what do they talk about? What kind of questions do they ask? Do they ask about people? People smart. Do they ask about plants, animals, rocks, minerals, and dirt? Nature smart. Do they talk about and ask about their body and movement and touch? Body smart. So what do they talk about? What do they ask about? What do they do in their spare time? What do they spend their money on? What gets them into trouble? Where do they excel? Those are the kinds of things that I think work well. And here's maybe the most important idea, and that is to ask them. A lot of children who hear me speak about the smarts have said, Dr. Cathy, nobody's ever asked me how I think I'm smart. Now, the first time you ask them that, they might not know because they've never used the word smart for anything except academic performance. So you might need to ask it differently, like, Jonathan, what do you enjoy doing? Bethany, what do you think you do really well? And you might be very surprised by their answers, and you need to believe that in that moment of their time, that was their perceived strength. And we can go with that and celebrate that and build that up, and it's going to be profound. It also says to them that you care, and that changes everything.
So this website kind of highlights a lot more about what
what she was just saying there. It will go through the different types of smart, as she calls them. And I'm not sure if there's a link on this page, but you can for sure just in your browser, you can, what is my smart quiz or what 8 smarts quiz or something like that. And you'll be able to find some that are catered to children and some that are catered to adults. And it's a really good way to boil down which way are you going to learn well. When I was learning, when I'd broken out of my own box and I was learning to teach my children better, I used this tool to help me understand my kids because, okay, I kind of get my first one because he's a lot like me, but I'm not really getting this second one. And I'm not sure what the other ones are going to be when they start to open up. And so I started to read this and study how to understand and notice with children what are their smarts. And from there, I was able to use different tools when we came into holdups in learning outcomes. For example, you're trying to meet these learning goals for the grade, but we're not getting there with, say dyslexia, which you mentioned earlier. I have one daughter, and one day in grade 1, she wrote everything forwards. And the next day, she wrote everything in its absolute mirror image backwards.
Wow.
And I looked at it and it was perfect. It was tidy. It was meticulous. And I could have criticized her for writing it backwards. But what I realized is that, wow, her brain is seeing things from different angles.
Yeah.
And she's looking at things from different sides. And so she's able to look at it from this side and put it down. And she's able to look at it from this side and put it down. And then I was like, okay, so how am I going to teach her which way it really does go, that it'll stick, right? And so there's different methods you can use. And we would get out little word magnets or little letter magnets, and we would make words with them. Or we would get out Play-Doh, and that's a really good way to do it with kids who are kinesthetic learners. They're hands-on. And you make all your letters out of the Play-Doh, or you make the Play-Doh or you take a sandbox and you draw the letters into the sand, and then it helps you to see it in a 3D way, because she's seeing things in a 3D way, but which way is it that you want me to see it, right? Huh. And which way do you want me to put it down so you can read what I'm writing? So that's one example.
Wow. Where did you learn that?
I do a lot of reading myself. I also have a friend who is a kindergarten teacher, and she has also taken extensive studies in university for beginner education. And I just sat down with her one day and I'm like, I need to pick your brain. I need help to teach my son how to read, how to keep his letters in the right order, how to keep my daughter from writing things backwards, how to, progress.
Yeah.
How do I deal with this energy? And she gave me some amazing things, some amazing tools to deal with. One of the great tools, I have to go into this one, for my son who would have been ADHD classified in school. We took a cup and we printed off a label that had, because he's a boy, so it had a stop sign and a yield sign and a slow sign on it. And it was color, and we put the paper around the cup. And then we took just your popsicle sticks, and we had colored ones. So blue was to slow down, and yellow was a caution, we need to yield a little bit, and red was a full stop.
Yeah.
And what I taught him was, if you're having a hard day where your brain is racing and you need to slow it down, you pull a blue stick. And when you pull it out, it's going to give you something calm to do. You're going to go get a snack. You're going to go lay on the couch for 5 minutes and rest. Something that is calming for him. And so we brainstormed about what things would be calming. Yellow was a yield, where we needed to be more aware, right? And so it's almost like a perk up. Right? Okay, so I need to be more aware. I'm falling asleep at my desk. I'm going to, crash. And so, okay, I get up and I go outside and I run around the house 5 times before I come back in, which works really good when it's minus 25.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine wake up. Yeah, I was going to say, the weather up here, it depends on the time of year.
Yes. And so those were the yield ones, and they were actually like perk up and help me to focus by getting my blood flowing, getting my energy back up, right? And jumping jacks, things like that. right?
Push-ups,
Somersaults,
anything.
push-ups, anything, just something. And then the red was the stop. And that was when he was getting angry and frustrated. I can remember buying him like a whole box of pencils. And before we were through September, they were all broken because he would get so frustrated and he'd sit at his desk and he'd just hold the pencil and he would just slowly break it. And that was, his frustration was turning into anger. And and I was like, you got to stop breaking pencils.
Yeah, no kidding.
They're not that expensive, but when you're breaking them all, it kind of, I don't want to keep going to the store.
Exactly. Well, there's obviously something there that needs addressing.
Right. And so then he would pick this red stick and there would be something like get a hug from mom, something that would diffuse his anger. Go and sit with the cat and pet it until it purrs, or go outside and just play on the swings and breathe the fresh air. Right. And so it worked really good because all of a sudden he wasn't on this schedule, which worked great for my first kid where, okay, we're going to do half an hour of Bible and then we're going to do an hour of math and then we're going to do an hour of English and then we're going to take a 20-minute recess. And that worked for the first one. But it wasn't working for the second one. He was always watching the clock. He actually, we also figured out that he was very sensitive, like auditory processing sensitive, which gave him a bit of a disorder at a young age. They call it auditory processing disorder because he's hearing everything. Like he's sitting there, and when I first clued into this through my friend who had done all of this extra education and was teaching me how to help him, she's like, ask him what he's hearing because I think he might have some auditory processing going on. And I'm like, okay. And so the one day I just sat with him, I'm like, okay, tell me, he's frustrated. He was in his breaking pencil mode. I'm like, what is the problem? Are you hearing too many things? He's like, yes. I'm like, okay, what are you hearing? He's like, I can hear my sister's socks on the floor. I can hear the fridge running upstairs. I can hear my brother's pencil scratching the paper. I can hear every time you pick up your tea and put it back down again. I can hear the wind outside.
Really?
And when he started telling me everything he was hearing and how hard it would be if you had all of that stuff turned up. Like, we filter so many things.
Yeah.
And his brain at that age wasn't filtering the sounds. He was listening to them all. And
really?
How can you possibly sit there and write a proper sentence?
No kidding.
Or do a math problem?
Very distracting.
Right? And
he's going insane.
Absolutely. And I'm getting mad at him and thinking he has disciplinary issues. Like, how good was that?
No kidding.
Right? And so
I've never even actually heard of that before, where someone has that kind of...
Yes, and a lot of times these kids who are called ADHD, this is what's going on for them. It's through sight and sound. They are taking in so much information and processing it in such detail, they are completely overwhelmed.
See, I'm the opposite.
Yes.
I drone everybody out.
Most of us...
I'm constantly in my own little world, not listening when I should be. Maybe
adults are that way because we've learned to filter, right? And we're zoomed in on what we're thinking about, and we filtered everything else out. But these kids, they have a gift of seeing or hearing or both, and it has turned into their worst enemy, and it has made it like doing academic schoolwork a nightmare.
Yeah.
Right. And so we started working on some things for him. We started making sure everybody else was a little more considerate about noise in the room when he was doing certain subjects. For his math, I would actually give him a different room to go to. Also bought him like those sound canceling earmuffs. And I had to go through a couple of sets because they were too tight on his head and they hurt his head, and then that backfired. But then we got the right set and we put those on him, and those were good school days. And when he lost them, it was not a good school day.
You should take him hunting.
Oh, absolutely.
Man, that would be unreal.
He's already that way. Like, we have a squirrel problem and he can find those squirrels and bring them home. And I realized he's 12 now. He's going to be 13
Hunting
soon.
Season's coming up. I might have to get a hunting buddy.
Hey, I think he would love it. He has gone with his grandpa. And yes, he does see things nobody else sees. We go hiking all the time. And he's like, Mom, did you see that grouse? And I'm like, what grouse? I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
Unreal. Yes. And
attention to detail.
Yes. And so I realized, it dawned on me while I was sitting there processing myself what I just learned about him. I'm like, if we lived in a different time where we're in small community that we've built ourselves and we're in a wilderness setting, like maybe 150 years ago, he's going to save the whole tribe because what he is going to find us our food.
Yeah.
And he's going to save our lives.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
today, him and the children like him, we're mad at them and we're medicating them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
No, exactly.
And it's a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
So
does he have a hard time sleeping at night? Like, is that a full time?
He used to.
Oh.
He used to. He's much better now. But yes, we went through a lot of difficulty. There were times where he couldn't sleep at night. And even at 8 years old, I would go sit in a rocking chair and just hold him until he could shut down. It was such a strange thing. And until I understood him, I was very frustrated with him at bedtime. But once I understood him...
Like even as a baby, like an infant?
As a baby, he slept great.
Oh, really?
It wasn't until he was older. He actually slept very well as a baby. So I'm not sure why that changed for him.
I'm not even sure why. I was curious about that. But I mean, that's a weird...
Yeah.
I shouldn't say weird. Let me correct that. But that's an interesting aspect.
Is he sleeps outside a lot. Like
really?
Yes, he has a tent that he bought himself, and he pitches it outside, and he
nature's
sleeps
calming.
Outside.
Like people have waterfall or raindrop or wind noises.
He's pitched it right in this bunch of trees, and he's there, and the
white
dog
noise. Then
the dog barks, and it doesn't wake him up because he knows the dog is taking care of that other sound out there, so he has peace. Oh. And I actually had to tell him, I'm like, okay, after -5, you're not allowed to sleep outside anymore. It's just not responsible of me as a parent.
I'm sure it's only a summer thing, isn't it? It's not a 20 or 30 below thing.
Yeah, yeah. So, and...
Well, that's kind of, like you said, I wonder how many little things like that go unnoticed.
Right, yeah.
Busy. We're all so busy.
We're so busy, and we're just saying, hey, you're a kid, you fit in this slot, and you do this. And we're not slowing down enough ourselves to go, you're a person, and you're unique, and you're specially created, and I need to understand you so that I can coach you properly. Because if you're a football player and I put you in swim lessons, that's my bad. That's my fail. So...
There's that communication, and I think that's something to work on both ends.
We have to humble ourselves as adults. Yeah. Like, I think it's really easy to go, I'm older than you, I'm smarter than you, and I have to eat my own words on that one because I am older than you and I'm smarter than you, and I pull that out and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm saying this to my kid. I'm such a jerk. And then you do the apology thing and you've made a better relationship in the end anyways. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. Apologizing to your kids is such a good thing. I got to say that.
Have you heard them apologize to you?
Yes, absolutely. Oh. And the more I model it, the more genuine it is from their side. Oh. Right? But I've also trained them to have respect and manners. Yeah. And if you've done something wrong, to say I apologize or I'm sorry. That's part of the coaching and the shepherding, whichever aspect you like to use.
I agree. I do. I really do agree with that.
Because essentially, you need them to be able to get along with other people, or they're not going to be able to succeed themselves as adults, right? Like, that's part of education.
You can't do it alone.
Yeah.
I've said this a few times on quite a few other episodes, but, whether you've got a personality trait that's very withdrawn from people or anything, the constant across every culture and humanity is isolation is the most effective form of torture.
Exactly.
They give it to prisoners. You're going in isolation in a square box forever. People with cabin fever are the ones that are even out in nature and have the ability to go and move around, and yet without the human interaction, whether they have a dog or not, they go crazy. Yeah. So human interaction on any level is very healthy. I think.
Well, it's a core of of what we are. We are created for relationship.
Yep.
We are. We can't be without it. I mean, some of us prefer more of it and some of us prefer less of
Absolutely.
it.
There's a spectrum, right? It's
Yeah.
not all or nothing, but
Yeah.
there is a healthy amount of interaction with
That's
other
right.
people. You've seen that, over the pandemic.
Oh,
It,
hard
it,
on
it,
everyone.
it came out in a lot of different ways with
Yes.
different people, but
Yeah.
it's especially with the elderly. You see that
Mhm.
even without a pandemic,
I
when they
actually
go
really
into
grieved for children.
isolation.
I
And
really grieved for children.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, and I mean, everyone has to make their own call on things, but if you're trying to teach a child, like there are children who lost years of learning verbal communication and being able to read emotionally another person because everyone walked around like this.
That's true.
And when you're a little tiny
Yeah.
child, you're learning how to interact and
Yeah.
how people interact and how to communicate by seeing that. And so there was a lot of stunting that happened there for some kids.
I found that people looked like they were pissed off when really they were happy. They were staring me down, and I didn't realize they're smiling. Their
see the
eyes
smile.
got squinty. Yeah, I mean, it looked like it was they're staring me down, and they're just giving me a smile, but I couldn't see it. I'm like, okay, well, guess
Yeah.
had that one wrong.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting how we all talk about this as time goes on.
Oh,
hey?
yeah. Yeah,
Back
I'm curious
then
to
when that
see.
happened. And
It's 5 years from now when it really
Yeah.
starts to have hindsight perspective. I'm
Yes.
curious to see how
yeah.
that's going to look.
It's a little fresh still for
It
a
is
lot of people.
very,
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
just talking about it, I'm sure everyone's kind of getting antsy in their seat or
Oh,
their
yeah.
chair.
Are they going to say this or that?
Oh my God, it's getting so awkward. Well, let's look at another one of these preloaded tabs that we were talking about here.
Sure. What else
So
do we have?
this next one here, you mentioned about this website. What is this?
Oh, I think you
Paywise?
might have.
Did I jump the gun on that one?
You might have been looking
Ooh.
for. Oh, yes, this one.
Firechild,
This was right
Waterchild.
early in the beginning. So when
Yeah.
I was talking about understanding your child and their personality, and that I was going into the Firechild there. This book was really helpful in helping me understand and teach my children to understand how we as humans interact with each other. And this one's written from a perspective of understanding children and how they become unfocused and how to bring them back into focus to help them learn, to help them grow as individuals, and to help them get along with others, right? And so we were talking earlier about the Firechild and how
Yeah.
maybe there'll be a candle in a room, or there'll be a campfire that warms the atmosphere, and they're just that bubbly personality that draws a group together. But they can also turn into a bonfire, or they can turn into a forest fire.
So this is
Right.
probably something that anybody can read no matter what. It's not just specific
Absolutely.
about the homeschooling. It's
Yes.
actually
Mhm.
something just
I would
in
actually
general.
really recommend it for teachers.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a problem kid in your classroom who won't focus, because this could give that teacher a little bit of insight into what is it that's throwing this kid off,
Yeah.
and how can I help them bring everything down to the level where it needs to be so that they can learn and they can socialize fairly and well,
Yeah.
right? So I would really recommend it to anybody working with the kids, school, not school, sports, actually. It's really great for understanding kids in sports because there's a lot of high energy that happens in sports, right? And so you might, find a kid who's off in a corner hiding. Well, why? And then the other kid is just exploding with energy. And how do you tap into that child and help them come down to their best functioning level, or up to their best functioning level, whichever way they're going, right? Yeah.
Just being more aware and knowledgeable.
Yes. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it.
Good.
Another one on the list. It's growing.
It's growing.
It
We
is.
need a whole library.
It's good to get into
you bet.
different things. So this one here that we were talking about is plugged in. So this is
Yes.
touching on
Reviewing stuff.
reviewing movies and whatnot.
Yeah, so you can review movies in the theater, movies that are out on DVD. There's usually have quite a library of even old stuff on here. They also review music and video games and TV series. And you go in here and somebody has watched it all, and then they're going to write a detailed review about the content in there.
Yeah.
There'll be, your sexual content, your language content, drugs and alcohol content, violence, and your spiritual content. And I found it very helpful for weeding out, because it's so hard. You watch a preview and most of any of that stuff you don't want your kid to see is not in the preview.
No.
Right? And I think that, ratings have really changed.
They have.
And they're not as trustworthy as they used to be.
No.
And you also need to know your child. Like,
Yeah. Well,
I have one
even in
child
school-
who can watch like a movie that is very intense, action-packed movie. She's totally fine. She'll go to bed that night and have a great sleep. But if you watch, even a Disney movie where it has a witch in it, she can't handle it. And she won't sleep for a week.
Oh, really?
Right? And so this is super helpful for me, because that movie might have been PG while the other one was 14.
Yeah.
And that one was okay for her because of who she is as a person. And this one, I'm not going to get any sleep for a week.
I've noticed
Right?
that just even with, you mentioned cartoons, and that's a big one. I noticed the cartoons nowadays compared to when I was a kid are wildly different.
Wildly.
You know
Yes.
what's kind of interesting, though, is the
Yeah.
quality of the graphics have gone downhill.
Yeah.
And the content's gone out of this world.
Yes.
I remember Transformers when I was a kid, and it was pretty good compared to,
Some of it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, look what's on there now. Futurama's a good one, a good example.
Yeah.
There's worse, but that's an example of the quality of the graphics, and then
It's just
the
not as
content.
good.
You're like, wow,
Yeah.
check that out. Holy smokes.
Yeah. Yes. And so, we're talking about homeschooling, and lots of times people are homeschooling because there's certain social norms that they're not comfortable with, and that's going to be strong in the newer movies, the newer video games, the newer TV shows, music even, right? And it's like, hey, my kid's listening to this artist, and I don't have time to listen to all their music, so I can go on here and I can spend 5 minutes reading about this artist and what their content is. And so, yes, my 13-year-old daughter or my 15-year-old son, I'm okay with you listening to that music, but I would really appreciate if you didn't listen to this one, and just give them that parental guidance to help them be the PG in their life, right?
Yep.
And this is great. The other one I think we had talked about, it's IMDb. So that's just literally the letters.
This one here.
Yeah, IMDb. And you can, type in any movie on there. Like you could type in your Barbie movie that just came out. That's a hot topic right now. And when you punch that in and go to the page for that, as you scroll down, and sometimes it moves where they put it on the page, but you'll come to a part where it will say, there you go, Parents Guide, just up a little bit above the Did You Know? And when you click on Parents Guide, then it will go into, as you go down, it will go into several different categories, and it will simply, in almost like a bullet point form, tell you what's in there, and they'll say none or mild or severe. And you can go through this and you can decide, hey, yeah, this one, I'm okay with it because this level of violence is not scary for my kid. Or, no, I'm not okay with that scene about drugs and smoking. I find that too suggestive. And it doesn't necessarily spoil anything unless you go all the way to the bottom. Then there's a spoilers part there. But I found this one really handy if I want to watch a movie with my kids and not spoil it. The plugged in one really tells you what the story's about in more detail, so you kind of feel like you've seen the movie before you've seen the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas this one just gives you a few heads up saying, hey, you're going to see this, this, and this, so you can either prepare the kids or choose to not watch it or say it's okay for your standard.
It's a pretty interesting feature.
It's an awesome feature. I really love it, and I still get to watch the movie as if I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
When I find one that's,
Instead of just the standard PG-14, or like you said, it's changed.
It's changed so
a
much.
lot.
And there's stuff where, honestly, there are some really good historical movies out there that I watch with my children. And we watch them when we're studying. Like we watched one, it's called The Book Thief. And it's about a little girl and a little boy and their relationship. She's a Jew and he's a German during World War II.
Oh.
Completely clean movie.
Yeah.
In the sense of swearing or adult content. However, it is set during a war and there are bomber planes flying overhead. So what's the rating? It's not rated, I think it's rated for 14 and up. Maybe it might even be restricted because it's a war movie.
Yeah.
but awesome movie for showing my children war history, right? And no, there is no blood and gore in it, right? The boy does die at the end, which is very sad. But it's a great
culture.
movie.
There's some culture in there that probably could be. It depends on, I guess.
Well, and it depends on how where your kids are at with understanding world history, right?
Exactly.
And maybe it's Holocaust Day,
yeah.
And you would like to present a movie that helps them understand. Well, what is Holocaust Day? My kids see stuff on the calendar like, what's Hanukkah, right? Yeah. I'm probably even saying that wrong, And so then you can find something, and so
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up here. We're going into a decent amount of time here. It has. See, I know this happens every time.
I don't doubt it.
So let's maybe make a couple other references, if we want, briefly on where people can find information. We kind of gave some of the movie and stuff like that, but when it comes to more of the curriculum stuff, are there a couple of websites or areas that I could start with?
Honestly, I would send you to my school website, the Heritage Christian Online School, because they have links on there for you to contact advisors and say, how can I do this? How do I do this? Right? And I have found the support from their community to be amazing.
Okay.
And they do have a teacher here in Fort St. John who will gladly meet with people, and she will give them information.
This is your website?
No, it's not my website. It's my school's website.
School's website.
The school that I'm enrolled with, right? Yep. So as a homeschooler, I have to register and enroll my children with an official school. And then from there, I can do, if I'm registered, I just do my own thing, whatever I want. If I'm enrolled, then I'm trying to follow the BC curriculum plan. But like I said, it's kind of like, hey, you need to cover math, and you need to cover socials, and you need to cover this, but you can plug in so many options.
Yeah.
Right?
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's a really good resource. And is there anything that you want to complement that website with, or is that pretty much a really good starting point?
I would say it's a good starting point. Another thing that is shifting in homeschooling is that there are going to be fewer distance learning schools that are authorized by the provincial government. They're starting to limit that. And so these schools, there will be only 5 in the province eventually. They're reducing it, and there were, I'm not sure how many, but probably in the 30s number of schools that were distance learning schools. So to meet the criteria, Heritage has had to revamp some of their high school courses for graduation and include certain content, which they've been able to do. The first year that this was thrown on us, we just kind of had to borrow public school materials for the 1 year, but now they've revamped their stuff to meet what the province is asking, and they have made the cut. And so they are a school that's going to stick around. And they're a big school, like I said, 4,000 students plus and growing. And their support system is huge. They have a big lending library where I can go to their lending library. It's down in Kelowna. I can online pick out a bunch of stuff. It gets shipped to me for free 4 times a year. I can have 4 shipments of curriculum.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Anything I want to pick. Anything I want to pick. Right? And so, like, you're worried about school books. They're there.
Yeah.
You enroll your child and you sign up, and
well, hopefully
you go for it.
5 options. Are you able to go? So that's BC.
That's BC, yeah.
So
Alberta is completely different. In Alberta, there's only, like in BC, you have the 2 kinds of home learning, right? The registered and the enrolled. And in Alberta, you're simply a homeschooler. And in that case, it's a different situation where they have a representative from the school system that visits your home twice a year to observe that you are educating your children in some fashion. And they give you a fund for your children, and you're on your own. There's no report cards. There's no dogwood at the end. It's different. So in some senses, some people will like it because you get more funding and you have more freedom. But in other senses, you don't have as much support, and you're not getting those provincial report cards, right?
Pros and cons for both of them, eh?
There is, yeah.
So do you see are you able to do the homeschooling with Alberta curriculum, even though you might live in BC?
Honestly, I order some of my curriculum out of Pennsylvania. You can order curriculum from anywhere.
Oh, okay.
Right? What it is it's the content, right? And so is your content hitting those dots that they want? And our teachers are really good. They have become very skilled at saying, yes, I know that curriculum and I know it covers this area. For example, my son really enjoys this curriculum that I order out of Pennsylvania, and I can't find it anywhere else, so I just keep ordering it from there. There's probably somewhere else I can get it, but I have a good contact. So
yeah.
I order this curriculum for him and it comes over, and then I say, okay, he's doing social studies through this curriculum, and I say to our support teacher, what do I need to cover? And he's like, well, that doesn't give you anything about Canadian First Nations, so here's some suggestions. Cover that in this area through one of these options that I'm giving you, and then you'll be fine. Right? And so our teachers are very good at knowing the curriculums that are out there. Just to highlight one curriculum, I love Apologia. Apologia.com would be a place to go and look at that. We can't order it into Canada from the Apologia website, but there's other homeschool websites that we can order the Apologia curriculum through. Amazing science curriculum. I could teach it. I could teach it my whole life and not get bored of it.
Apologia.
Yes.
What I'm going to do is throw all of these links in the show notes.
That's a great idea.
So anybody that's looking, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes, but you know, anybody who's looking at trying to find all of this stuff,
sure,
the quick links are down there. You just click on it, and it'll take you to each one of these websites that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I'll give you another one too. It's Canadian Home Education Resources, and they are like the all in all. They're like the Walmart of stores for shopping for curriculum.
Oh, really?
Yes, and they have regular sales where you can get free shipping or 20% off or things like that, and they can pretty much source anything you need.
Really cool.
They have a great sale bin as well, which I should not ever look at.
Oh, that's your weakness in there, eh?
Absolutely. Me and bookstores and homeschool shops, it's not a good thing unless I've saved up for a while.
Well, I'd like to just say thank you for coming out.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is like really awesome to be able to share some of this and just encourage people. Like, you can homeschool. It's not that scary. It looks scary, but it's not. No. It's just that first step, right?
It is the first step, and you know, it's kind of cool to be able to actually have someone come on and go through a lot of that kind of stuff. And I hope to maybe have you on again, maybe, you know, later on at some point in time.
Love to. Yeah.
Awesome.
Especially if you get questions back or stuff like that, then we can dig into different paths. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
If anyone does have questions, then I encourage people to just go on my website. It's an easy way for me to filter them out.
Yeah.
And I get them in the form of an email. So if somebody's looking at getting in contact with you and they send me an email with the questions and they want to maybe, you know, have it a little bit more poignant towards you, then I can forward it to you or filter that out. So that is another way. Social media is kind of, you know, got its drawbacks. I find that works. I've had a few people do that already, and it seems to work good because then I can, you know, just get that message directly to, you know, the person they're trying to get in contact with.
Yeah, and just kind of filter out those genuine questions from the other.
Absolutely.
The other stuff that's.
I have found that on social media, you tend to get a lot of air quote experts.
Yes, I know.
That don't really actually have a lot of positive feedback. So, you know, it's easier to try and filter some of that.
Yeah. My husband says that it's a lot of virtue signaling, you know, I want to show you that I'm smart.
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So, yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thanks again.
You're very welcome.
And
thank you.
We'll chat. If you're watching this, maybe I should address the camera. Check out some of the special behind the scenes footage at the end of this episode. Yeah. Okay. Talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.
That's awesome. believe it. Oh, wow. Look at that. Rainbow colors.
I have a dog named Daisy.
Okay. I say okay, but I'm not really actually okay. I'm not getting it. It goes up around that tree. Look at how high you go. So these are your tomatoes? And what kind of tomatoes are these? Should we do a little selfie of trying out the tomato?
Let's see you make a face.
I gotta. Oh, we won't do it. Those are sweet. Those are super good. Yeah. Nom 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 nom. Uh-oh.
We can. Oh, yeah. So this one goes in the middle. This one goes on the side.
Oh, really? So they grow so they match where they're supposed to be on the tail.
Here.
Oh man, look at you guys go.
See her son write a business letter because he had to for school, and all of a sudden he's doing something that people care about.
That's pretty cool. That's a
So
big
we need
win.
to follow up on it.
Right.
2019, what we did.
2019
We went through all of
2020,
Canada.
2018 and 2019.
Province by province. And then we went through those 10 countries.
We don't have our United States on, but this is when we were doing them, like,
This was when we did 26 countries in 1 year.
See, we've got the
Yeah, we have
alphabet
this
of
chart here.
international children. It's got
We
one
had
for
to
each.
change a few out because we had already done, like,
Yeah,
we had
like
already
the
done Mexico
Yeah.
earlier, right? So we
We've
did
done Mexico,
Madagascar instead.
And we done Germany.
We had done India
Germany
already.
or-
No,
It was
we done
India.
India. We did Ireland instead.
Yes.
Cool.
No, we did
And
India.
these are all the, which flags are these? These are country
Those are
flags?
these
Yes,
ones.
they're
The country flags of the
Austria,
countries we've
Bolivia,
studied,
Czechoslovakia.
Slovakia?
Czech
Czech
Republic.
It's no longer Czechoslovakia. Now it's Czech
Czech
Republic
And Slovakia.
Denmark.
Two different countries.
Ecuador, France.
And we did have to do some historical work for Yugoslavia because it's no longer a country.
Japan.
Yeah, do you guys remember what 7
Kenya.
countries? Is it 7 that it broke into?
It's Serbia, Croatia,
Bosnia.
Rhodesia, I think so.
Yeah.
Luxembourg. And this one is Madagascar. This one. Happy. Oh yeah, this one's in Madagascar.
Albania,
This is another one.
Serbia,
Poland.
Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, and
That's what
Macedonia.
Samuel makes
There's
us
like
say.
5 countries or something that they split up.
Romania, Scotland, Thailand, United States, Venezuela, Wales, Croatia. That's a people group.
Yes, for X we actually chose a people group
'Cause there is no
because they
countries.
have been decountryed. They actually-
Really?
the
I didn't know
people
that.
group, and they are in, was it mostly
South
Zambia?
Africa. South Africa.
Yes. So they have no country of their own, but they're a distinct people group.
In South Africa.
And then we've got Yugoslavia and Zambia.
Got them all.
Yep.
And then over
what's-
there,
Oh,
that's
okay,
our great
who's that?
grandpa's.
That's great grandpa.
Oh, really?
From World War
There's
II.
his picture.
Wow.
Mom, you drew that, right?
No, I didn't draw that. Somebody else did.
I thought that
And then
was
over
you.
there we reconstructed the U.S. state by state.
So, but over there is the provinces, all the
Yeah,
provinces?
all the provinces and territories.
I'm gonna step on Lydia's rover thingy. I made it.
So do you know all the provinces?
Well, it says
territories?
right there.
Oh, it says it right on there.
South
Oh.
Korea, Italy, Russia.
Yeah, they all say.
And then for these ones, we've got like when they became part of Canada, Ontario's, who discovered them or something like that, and then like what the flag looks like.
And then
Cool.
over here we